good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are. We have people joining us from all over this year. Welcome to Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships Summit Sessions 2021, Reimagining and Rebuilding Communities. I'm NEEP's Executive Director, Eira Shur. After a 2020 without a summit, we are excited to be back together, and I am thrilled that so many people chose to join us to engage in these sessions. We decided that we could not wait another year to do what the NEEP Summit has done in the past. Bring together practitioners and leaders from around the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic region and beyond to share their work, their successes and challenges, and to collaborate with peers and with current and future partners. The NEEP Summit has always served to highlight that together in partnership, we are stronger and we are better equipped to accelerate progress towards a region that is ever more energy efficient, equitable, economically strong, and climate secure. These summit sessions will follow in that tradition, focusing on the many benefits that energy efficiency and decarbonization of our homes, buildings, and industries can bring. Our communities need these benefits as we enter into an era of rebuilding and recovery. This is a truly exciting time to move more quickly on efforts that we are working on together and that are working for all of us, and to consider how past failures and new opportunities can align to build a better future, a healthy, affordable future. So I'll be back in a moment to share a little more about what's coming over the next 3 days. But first, I will welcome Jessica Augett and Jennifer Wasson, who will go over some logistics and explain how to engage fully in these summit sessions. Jess, take it away.
Thank you, Eira.
Yes, thank you so much.
Hi, Jen. How are you?
I am fabulous. It's finally here. It's Summit Day.
I know. Yay. It's happening. It's happening. So I am Jessica Augett. I am your Industry Relations and Event Manager. I support lots of different organizations as we all work together to collaborate, and I'm very excited to be here today. Jennifer?
So I am Jennifer Wasson. I am the development manager at NEEP, which means I focus on all of our fundraising and our partnerships with the federal government, with our states, with our foundations, and I get to work with some with our industry partners as well, which is always a pleasure.
That's great. And so I think we would be remiss if we didn't start off by thanking how we are here today. And that's definitely through a lot of collaboration with our planning and programming committee and all the different organizations that we work with on the regular. But specifically, it's from sponsorships. They help support us and get people together so that we can have conversations like this. So I would like to thank gold sponsors and also NEEP allies, Mitsubishi Electric, E for the Future, Daikin, and Solutions for Energy Efficient Logistics, that's SEAL, and they're one of our newest allies this year, as well as our supporting sponsor, Sea Power. Thank you very much.
And I would like to thank our foundation sponsor, Bar Foundation, who is a gold sponsor. And then I'd like to recognize some of our state partners who are also gold sponsors. So shout out to New York and NYSERDA. A thank you to our Rhode Island partners. That would be Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources, National Grid, and the Energy Efficiency and Resource Management Council. And then finally, Connecticut. So shout out to Connecticut Deep, UI, and Eversource.
Yes. Thank you very much. So moving from here, we'd like to talk a little bit about the format. So I know Jen and I are in agreement. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm going to come in and do my personal talk with you. Are we a little sick of webinars? Tiny bit? A little bit. A little bit? Okay. So we kind of thought about that, and we thought about how we feel at this point in a year and a half of strictly online working. And we thought that we like the opportunity to not necessarily be strapped to our computer for 3 days for this event. And we thought that maybe we'd like to be able to be trusted to do other work while this goes on in the background. Am I allowed to say that? You might not, you might, right?
You might want to. These people. They know what's important.
You might have to order something on Amazon. You might have a budget you're working on. You might want to go for a walk. So we thought about that, and to kind of combat that fatigue of the webinars, we're slide free, visuals free. So our goal here is to create some conversations you get to listen in on a working group meeting in a way, right? We've got some people who have tried things, different experiences, and we can kind of collaborate on the fly. And with that, we're going to encourage you to get involved in it. Ask questions. We're going to be feeding them to the moderators throughout the entire program. What do you want to hear about? So we're going to encourage you to do that in that spirit of collaboration.
And then also in talking about spirit of collaboration, NEEP is really working to improve our accessibility both at work and all of our events. So we have enabled the closed captioning. If you do not need that, you can turn it off. That is located at the bottom right of your screen. So feel free to do that, but it is available for those who would like it.
Absolutely. And then the other thing that we have going on is the chat. So we're not going to be monitoring it actively. And again, I encourage you to ask your questions specifically in the question and answer feature on Zoom. But in the chat, it's a great place to start to get to know the other people, attendees, maybe have a little side conversation going on regarding the session. Again, we have faith in your ability to multitask, and kind of we're looking for you to get the whole experience out of this event today, our Summit Sessions 2021.
And I would also like to say, as you're connecting on chat, I just want to do a little plug. Later this afternoon, at 3 o'clock, Jess and Jen team, we will be leading the online networking session. And I know speed networking might sound a little weird, but let's be honest, by now I would have chatted with about 20 different people at my multiple trips to the coffee station. And I've not had that chance yet. So this will be a great opportunity this afternoon to chat with some of the other attendees and get to know them and hear about what they're doing.
Absolutely. Join us. What do you have to lose? Come check it out.
Awesome.
You meet a couple people, you learn what they're doing, they'll learn what you're doing, and off we go, right? Let's make some friends. So with that, I think we're going to turn it back over to Ara, but Jen and I will be back later to do some speed networking with you. Thank you for joining.
Yes.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks, Jen. I completely agree with you. I hope people give the speed networking a try. I did it in another event and I actually loved it. And I'm with you, Jen. Besides the bottomless coffee, it's the thing I miss most about in-person events. So I hope that is something people will try. So for those of you who just joined, I'm Ara Schur, NEEP's Executive Director. This is a very special year for NEEP. 2021 is NEEP's 25th anniversary. I wanted to take a moment to recognize the organization's long history. So back in the mid-1990s, as the price of electricity and natural gas was increasing across the region, NEEP's founder, Sue Coakley, recognized that energy efficiency could reduce consumption and costs. She understood that the promise of efficiency could best be realized through partnerships between policymakers, utilities, industry, and advocates. She also knew that regional collaboration could best drive market transformation for more efficient equipment, practices, and policies. So in 1996, Sue founded NEEP to realize this promise. And over 2.5 decades, she led NEEP through the transformation of many technologies, the development of numerous policies, and the rise of our region as a nation-leading area for the promise of energy efficiency. She was also prescient in understanding the need to expand the lens of energy efficiency to address a two-way grid, time and locational efficiency, and building decarbonization, launching NEEP's nation-leading work on heating electrification almost a decade ago. I am very excited that Sue is participating in this year's Summit Sessions. She'll be joining a conversation on Wednesday about new frontiers in partnerships that can propel decarbonization of buildings to meet both efficiency and air quality goals. And I hope that we can be back together for next year's Summit to give Sue a proper toast and roast. She deserves to bask in the respect and admiration that so many in this field feel for her when it's safe to do so again. So fast forward to today, 25 years later, when we are looking at a very complex and enmeshed energy puzzle. We are facing a climate imperative with no time left to take swift action towards eliminating greenhouse gas emissions from the built environment. And we are also wrestling to address the imperative of equity and to make sure that the clean energy economy does not replicate the injustices of the current energy system. The focus of NEEP's 2021 Summit Series is centering communities and how, in a time of recovery, communities must be at the center of this reimagining and rebuilding that's needed to address both of these imperatives. Over the next 3 days, you'll hear our speakers discuss how they're using policy and program design, partnerships, financing strategies, and more to advance climate stabilization and resiliency, affordability and equity, economic recovery and growth, and public health and well-being. You'll hear that looking forward, energy efficiency and related solutions will be more important than ever to make sure that as we decarbonize our built environment, the costs and benefits are balanced and that the benefits are distributed more equitably than today. So we have an amazing group of speakers. They come from the state, local, and federal level. They represent the private sector, the public sector, and nonprofits. And they are working on the ground, developing policy, executing programs, and completing real projects. As Jess and Jen said, these sessions are slide-free conversations, and there's plenty of opportunity for you to engage and ask questions. Should be really amazing. I also wanted to echo Jess and Jen in thanking NEEP sponsors, our funders, and our allies for supporting the work that we do, and in particular, this event. We would not be able to bring you all together without their support. I also wanted to thank our partners and collaborators, to our speakers who have agreed to share their time and knowledge, and to our program committee who help us find the speakers and the themes that you will hear throughout this session. And finally, thanks to all of you for choosing to join us. I hope you're ready to go. With that, I will welcome John Balfe, NEEP Senior Buildings and Community Solutions Manager, to get us started. Morning or afternoon, John. How are you? I'm doing great. So I don't know if you just heard, but I talked about how it's NEEP's 25th anniversary. And I hope through the sessions, everyone, NEEPers and others, will give a little bit of background about NEEP. So just remind the audience how long you've been at NEEP.
Yeah, I've been at NEEP just over 6 years now, and I was having this conversation with some colleagues a few weeks ago, and they were reminding me that I'm no longer in that youthful, that younger echelon of NEEPers. So I'm kind of graduating into that next phase of the career. But yeah, I've been lucky to be at NEEP for over 6 years now.
Great. Well, I'm jealous. You get to kick us off with an amazing session about communities. So I will leave you to it, and good luck. And I look forward to seeing what you do.
Awesome. Thank you, Ara. Yeah, I'm excited to be kicking us off here today too and leading us into our first session. But before doing so, I just wanted to share a few words before we get started. So the communities work that we focused on at NEEP is all about collaboration with our many partners. We've taken on a bit of a mantra over the past couple of years internally, and that mantra is meeting communities where they are. And what we mean by this is the idea of crafting energy efficiency solutions that are really tailored to the specific needs of the individual community in which we're working. So examining the specific challenges, looking at the demographics of both the people and the buildings within a community, understanding the priorities and the goals of the local government, as well as the residents and business owners, and then crafting solutions that actually make an impact and meet the needs of that community. That's really what we mean by meeting communities where they are. And I think our first session here really kind of exemplifies this mantra. And we'll be hearing from 3 different cities about 3 different approaches that they're taking to develop innovative plans and solutions. And then we'll be hearing more about how they've implemented these programs. So it's all about tailoring the programs to the specific needs of our communities. And with that, I'm really excited to introduce someone that knows a whole lot about collaborating and meeting communities where they are. Cami Peterson is the Director of Clean Energy at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and she'll be leading us through our first session today entitled A Tale of 3 Communities. So I welcome Cami to the screen here, to the virtual stage, I should say, and I want to thank her for her contribution to the summit as a key member of the Planning Committee. And I know, Cami, it's been a long road to get here today, and you've been graciously, donating a lot of your time to the ride. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited that we got here, and I'm excited for this session.
Great. Me too. So yeah, with that, I know we've got kind of a jam-packed agenda for our first session, so I don't want to take up too much more of the time, but I'll let you introduce yourself and the speakers, and we'll take it from there.
Great. Thank you so much, John, and thank you to Ara and to all of the NEEPers. Hello, everybody. So excited to be here today. As John mentioned, my name is Cami Peterson. I'm the Director of Clean Energy at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. That's the regional planning agency for the 101 cities and towns of Metro Boston. And there I oversee our local, regional, and statewide clean energy and climate planning, procurement, project implementation, and policy efforts in service to our cities and towns. So we're a mission-based public agency that gets to work towards smart growth, regional collaboration, equity, and climate change mitigation and resilience. And in my role there, I also am lucky enough to serve on the Statewide Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, where I'm co-chair of the Equity Working Group, and also get to serve in the Global Warming Solutions Act Implementation Advisory Committee, where I serve as chair of the Buildings Work Group. So as John said, I get to do a lot of building decarbonization, policy, planning, program work every day, and I'm excited to moderate this session and learn a lot more. So thank you to NEEP for their leadership and expertise, for including me here today to learn from these exemplary but quite different communities. So with that, I just want to welcome everyone again to the session, remind everyone to please ask us questions in the Q&A box as we go throughout our session. And I'm excited now to get into our session, A Tale of Three Communities. So in this interactive session, we'll have our three different communities, and you see our esteemed panelists here, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. They will share with us how they've navigated the intersection of energy efficiency and decarbonization in the building sector while also trying to reach equity and economic goals. As you heard from Jess a few minutes ago, they will not be using slides or presentations or visuals. That's the case throughout these summit sessions. So we're looking forward to having you, the audience, engage and enjoy in our conversation and add questions to that Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many in the second half of our session as possible. So without further ado, I'm honored to present our panelists here today who have now joined me here. You'll see Ann Watson, our Mayor of Montpelier, Vermont, Ava Richardson, our Sustainability Manager from the City of Baltimore, Maryland, and Rob Hart, the Energy Manager from the City of Providence and Rhode Island. And now I'd like to ask each of them just to give you 1 to 2 minutes, a little bit about themselves and the perspective they'll bring today. And we'll go to you first, Ann.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here and having this conversation with you all. Just as you said, my name is Ann Watson. I'm the mayor of Montpelier, Vermont. This is the third year that I've been mayor, and so I'm up for re-election soon. But so we'll see. I'm planning to run again. But before I was mayor, I was a city councilor in Montpelier for about 6 years. So I've got a lot of time with local government in the area here. And just so folks can get a sort of a flavor for what Montpelier is like, even though we are the capital city of Vermont, we have less than 8,000 people in our city. So we're a very small population here. We do grow during the day because we have a lot of jobs in the area. So we might double during the day, but otherwise it's a pretty small community. But we are very committed to energy efficiency and renewables to bring our fossil fuel emissions down. So this is a very interesting conversation to me. I'm looking forward to hearing from everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ann. And we'll go next to hear a little bit from Ava, her bio and the perspective she hopes to bring today. Over to you, Ava.
Great. Thank you so much, Cami. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ava Richardson, and I'm really happy and thankful to NEEP for inviting Baltimore to be a part of this conversation today. Baltimore is a post-industrial city, and as such, with a old housing stock and all that you may hear in the media about Baltimore, we are also an incredibly resilient city and innovative city. And so I'm really happy to share some of the thoughts and processes as it relates to particularly energy efficiency related to buildings from a public health perspective with you today. My background is in public health, and so I believe everything is a public health issue or an environmental issue. So I'm really excited to provide that perspective with you all on the call today. And I know we have Mayor Watson and Mayor Hart from Providence and Montpelier, but sorry, our mayor couldn't make it. You're stuck with me. But thank you again for having us here.
Thanks so much, Ava. And we'll toss it over to you next, Rob. I think you might have just gotten a promotion, but you can speak to that in a minute. And we'd love to hear a little bit about you and the perspective you'll be bringing today. And then we'll go on to having our conversation.
Certainly. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate and for inviting the City of Providence to be involved with this panel. We're really excited. My name is Rob Hart. I'm with the Office of Sustainability. I serve as the energy manager for the city. And I've been working in clean energy in one form or another for about a decade now. And this is my second government role. I came previously from a role with the State of Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources. In Providence, we're, especially with the Office of Sustainability, we very much like to focus on equity in all of our work. We have a lot of climate goals and targets that we've established, and we went through a lot of hard work to develop a climate justice plan that really centers equity as a part of all of those goals. So I'm excited to continue this conversation and talk more about our work later.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rob. And thank you to all of our panelists. You all will get a chance to get to know them and their cities even more intimately as we talk through how everything's going in their communities. And thanks, Rob, for that great segue, because that climate justice plan is something I know I'd heard about recently and was really excited to learn more about. And I think a lot of our communities, these three in particular, are working hard at kind of road mapping how we get to meet the climate goals that we have and the urgency of the climate crisis. So we heard about how these three communities are quite different, in terms of geography, in terms of size and demographics and other factors for sure. But you all have been working in different ways to establish plans and roadmaps to decarbonize the building sector and other sectors in your cities and to go about it equitably. So in somewhat of a quick snapshot, I'd love to hear more about that. How you've gotten started, that process, where you've ended up at, what those goals look like, something maybe you wish you knew at the start of it that might be useful to other communities listening in. So maybe I'll bounce back to you, Rob, just to hear a little bit more about that climate justice planning process. And then would love to hear from Anne about how Burlington's been going about this, Ava about Baltimore's experience, and encourage both of them to jump in with questions or comments on it. And we'll try to hear how everybody's thinking about this issue. But over to you first, Rob.
Sure. So the climate justice plan, which was published in 2019, was a work that took a lot more time to develop. We reached out to environmental justice stakeholders before 2016 and worked together to develop a racial environmental justice committee that helps to guide the city's work in sustainability and energy. And the climate justice plan, one of our key concepts is that we are working to achieve a collaborative governance model. And this is not something that we've achieved yet, but it's something we're working towards and trying to measure our progress towards. And in developing a lot of the goals which are in our climate justice plan, and also were enshrined into a city ordinance this year, which include being carbon neutral by 2050, electrification of our city buildings by 2040, our transportation, and also we have goals set up for residential and business conversion to heat pumps as well by 2050. So, but at the same time, we really do want to center that collaborative governance as part of that process, so to make sure that the communities which are most impacted by the climate crisis in Providence have a direct role in the decision-making process and the planning and implementation of those solutions.
That's great, Rob. And I think that's so important to hear about how you've been bringing the community in to learn from their voices from the start, and in ways that you're still trying to make that a more collaborative type of governance structure. And I know you all have been working on kind of road mapping your progress for climate action as well. Would love to hear about Montpelier's progress on this, and how if you think there are some similarities or some differences to the way that Providence is going about it.
Yeah, it's super interesting to hear what you all are doing in Providence. So we, just like you've sort of broken it down into sectors, we're also thinking about it in the different sectors. And one of the first differences that we made was thinking about municipal operations versus what are the goals for the community. And we did actually put out to bid a request for a plan for how the municipality itself, how our operations could reach net zero energy. And we just received that back, which is super interesting. It's very encouraging that with current technologies, we can get really quite close to zero net energy and not have to buy carbon offsets, which is great. But besides that, thinking about the community, how are we going to help transition the community off of fossil fuels? We're also thinking about it in terms of like the business community. And then also, in terms of equity, for us, there's a lot of focus on renters, or that's a lot of the conversation that we have is around the renting community. I believe it's not atypical for a city to have more than 50% of its dwelling units be rentals. And that is true in Montpelier. About 60% of our housing units in Montpelier are rental units. And really what that means is that the people living there don't necessarily have the agency or the authority to make energy decisions for their own buildings. It really comes down to the landlord and their choices. And so some folks may be familiar with this idea of the split incentive, which is when a renter may be paying for the heat, but the landlord is the one that owns the infrastructure for the heating system. So as long as the landlord is not paying for the heat, they may not see those returns on savings if they were to make switches. So we've spent some time thinking about how we can particularly help our renting community make that transition. And so we actually collaborated with our local efficiency utility, which is Efficiency Vermont, to put together a program specifically for landlords. As a small municipality, like we don't have a lot of money to just throw at things, but we don't necessarily need to. There are already programs out there. There are loans, there are grants available to folks. It's just the matter of like connecting the landlords to the resources that exist. So this collaboration with Efficiency Vermont was really about having a dedicated person who could basically handhold landlords through the process of, for any landlord who was interested, they could be connected with the specific resources, loans, grants, et cetera, that applied to their buildings. And we actually saw, as a result of that program, we saw a spike in the number of rental buildings that went through a weatherization process that year. That was hugely encouraging to us to see that actually made a difference. In addition to that, the city, as a part of our effort to become fossil fuel free, we built a wood chip burning district heating plant to heat all of our downtown municipal buildings. And so it's piping hot water under the ground to heat these buildings. And as long as the pipes were going past businesses in the downtown, we offered to them that they could jump on. So many of our downtown businesses did make that transition and are no longer heating with oil, but are connected to this wood chip heating plant. So those are just a couple of specific things that the city of Montpelier has done. And there's more I can talk about, but I'll save it.
There's some really interesting tactics there, and I'm wondering about, Ava, your perspective. And I can only imagine that there are a large number of renters, that there is that split incentive aspect at play in Baltimore as well. I know that's something, hearing about the progress you've made there, and with the hand-holding type program, certainly encouraging to me to hear, for it's something that we struggle with a lot in our Massachusetts cities and towns. Ava, any perspective that you want to bring from Baltimore's climate action planning process and your work to really instill equity and public health into that process?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Tammy. Definitely when it comes to renters who have to kind of like communicate that message to their landlords or get that approval from their landlords in terms of particular weatherization updates, that is a challenge, and educating people how to go about and engage in that process is really important. In Baltimore, we also really focused those weatherization approaches and that programming to low-income households and to older adults as well, because we know as people age in their homes, it's harder for them to maintain it. And oftentimes we'll see that the housing just it won't necessarily be fit for them, especially for someone who may have mobility issues. And so a lot of the upgrades have, again, these very specific kind of like public health framings are really anchored in equity, thinking critically about how we get those resources to communities that show the highest need. We did have a few years ago the Baltimore Energy Challenge, and as a homeowner myself, I was able to have someone come out and they do this whole kind of like energy efficiency survey on your home, and that was really great. And then you can kind of take it a step further and get some of the weatherization done and updated. And there's some supports that residents or homeowners can take advantage of. But we know that at the kind of like individual homeowner level, that is incredibly important when it comes to weatherization and ensuring that, especially again, older housing stock, ensuring that there's adequate insulation, ensuring that, people, for those that do need updated HVAC systems, that they're able to do that. But more and more, we're thinking about the community level, and we're thinking critically as urban heat islands become more of an issue and cities continue to warm. That is also an incredible threat to people, and to just ensuring that people are able to be comfortable in their homes. Sometimes certain areas of the city, depending on what the infrastructure there looks like, especially if there's nothing but asphalt and concrete, it could be 10 to 20 degrees higher than cooler areas, especially depending on the foliage in certain communities. And we're realizing now that oftentimes these urban heat islands, it correlates to the racial and the economic makeup of the community. And so we want to be really diligent about addressing that, because we know there's going to be, there will continue to be warming, particularly in urban environments. So we're thinking critically about how we support kind of like the infrastructure and the weatherization at the individual house level, but also at the community level, because we know that's going to be really important. Things such as white roofs, again, getting people connected to as many resources as possible, and what are those climate mitigation approaches, from cooling centers to ensuring that people are staying hydrated, to ensuring that, older adults or people who are aging, ensuring that they are connected to others in their community. So someone's calling them and checking in on them when it is a cold, red day, to make sure that they are able to manage the heat. And if they do need some help, that they have the support that they need. And so we realize that as we move into this, and as we continue to approach things, again, from an equity as well as a public health perspective, with environmental sustainability really at the well, really all of those things at the center, we know there's so many different, both financial and social elements that we have to take into account, and we're trying to do that as intentionally as possible. So, and I'd love to hear, Rob, more about kind of how you all focus and approach equity. And I didn't mean to promote you to mayor just a little bit ago, but my apology for that. But yeah, I would love to hear more about what you all are doing from that equity perspective, especially if you all are addressing some urban heat island effects there as well.
Yeah, urban heat has been shown, and recently in New Orleans, there were a number of residents who, were unable to access the heat shelters that were in place in New Orleans, even though they were, less than 10 miles away from the shelters, so this is something we're well aware of in Providence. We recently went through a resilience workshop where we discussed building community resilience hubs, where we would be able to provide services for the community, by the community, in different parts of the city. And that's something that's in the planning process. But we're also looking closely at our canopy. We do, as a New England city, have lots of beautiful old trees, but as in many other cities, those trees aren't equitably placed. We have the wealthy East Side has lots of tree coverage, and some of our other neighborhoods don't have as much. So, we're doing an assessment, and we're certainly going to work to make that more equitable over time. But heat and power is such a big challenge, in an emergency. So I think resilience is certainly front of mind with how we address, all these issues.
With that, I might kind of give us a little bit of a workshopping challenge. I think as Jess mentioned in the lead-in, the way these sessions are set up with, it being more of a conversation, it's kind of like listening in on a working group. And I like the chance for you guys to kind of engage like that. So one of the things I thought would be interesting kind of to talk through a little bit, as you talk, Rob, about community resilience hubs and the need to kind of build in and think more holistically about how we're upgrading our buildings and our building stock. And Ava, you really touched on the need with Urban Heat Island and increasing heat and being able to mitigate all these different issues and provide for comfort and, economic relief and health, and obviously also making sure we're reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. There's a lot of factors at play. And I know there's older building stock in all of our American cities, but particularly here on the East Coast and in your 3 communities, there's a lot of older buildings. So I'm thinking about, say that each of you is looking to retrofit an older commercial building, an existing old commercial building. Think of some typology that's really pretty common in your community. It doesn't have to be the same across all 3. It could be, but my guess is it might not be. And I'd love to hear about, and maybe popcorn style, how you would each think about what needs to be done to that building. And we don't need to get too technical here, though. Feel free to. But thinking through as we undertake that, what does that building look like in the end, that we're able to go through and really look to deeply decarbonize it, do a deep energy retrofit to it. How could it serve as a model as you look to do that, throughout your existing building stock, particularly to that typology? And what does that building look like in the end? What technologies or systems or measures have been installed? Were there certain policies or types of financing that you had to take advantage of or put in place in order to make that happen? Anything kind of along these lines of what do these buildings look like? What do we need to do to, a common building type in your communities to really get to that deep decarbonization place? So would love, if that prompt makes sense to you all, would love to hear your thoughts, and feel free at popcorn style just to shout them out.
Yeah, I really love that question, Cami. And right now in Baltimore, where we have a kind of like a buildings working group that's a part of a sustainability and resiliency subcabinet forming, and we've kind of segmented those some of that work into municipal buildings, commercial buildings, and residential buildings, because we know that those are very different things. Obviously, a city can control to a higher degree what happens in their municipal buildings, and then at the commercial level, we know there's a lot of regulation that goes on there, and you have to consider like what that engagement with developers looks like. And then again, for the residential buildings, it's a very different approach, considering what kinds of programs and fundings you could have. But for our municipal buildings in this situation, I'm going to assume it's a municipal building, just really equipping that building with smart energy technology. So what we notice a lot in a lot of our buildings is just in most larger buildings, especially if they're older, just poor temperature regulation. So you get a lot of microclimates where it may be kind of 10 to 20 degrees hotter. And some of our colleagues' offices that have like a lot of glass windows, it gets really hot during some points in the summer, and vice versa. It could get really cold in the winter. And so everyone, like some people are wearing coats, other people are like hot. So depending on what time of the year it is. And so just having better infrastructure to be able to better track kind of what those climates are within a building, and hopefully to support energy efficiency. So especially as we know that more and more people may not be using office buildings as much, or may not be coming in as much, ensuring that we're thinking critically about like how we're limiting use as limiting energy use as certain areas may not need to be lit or may not need to be heated or cooled or whatever the case may be. So thinking critically about that. And when it comes to the design, definitely thinking about what the cooling kind of like, what the best materials in terms of like creating more cooling infrastructure looks like, whether or not that's a white roof or a living roof with vegetation on it, and what the surrounding, whatever is surrounding the building, what that looks like. In terms of the cost, I don't really have a great sense of, or the funding mechanisms. Obviously, when it comes to municipal buildings, a lot of that would be supported by like local revenues, but I do wonder if there are some creative ways to go about that when engaging with departments of general services, who oftentimes will manage city buildings and things. So yeah.
Thank you, Ava. Yeah, and Rob, other thoughts on what that building should look like in the end in your communities, or questions or thoughts in response to Ava?
Yeah, sure. So I want to answer this question in a couple of different ways. One is sort of similar to Ava. I was also thinking about, okay, let's assume that this is a municipal building. And we did just have this roadmap to get to net zero given to us by our partner, VEIC, Vermont Energy. I'm not going to remember the acronym. Anyway, and part of the plan there for many of our municipal buildings was to build sort of freestanding district heat, or not, I'm sorry, just wood chip heating systems. And that's one of the things that makes sense for us for large commercial buildings. For some commercial buildings up here, it may make sense to have cold climate heat pumps. We're actually in the process of talking about our recreation building, and that is a real possibility for that space, is a cold climate heat pump. Obviously, weatherization for all those buildings is important, and we would probably accomplish all of this through bonding, particularly because it constitutes future energy savings. So there's actually a return on the part of the investment from the taxpayers. But the other way that I want to answer this question is that I actually want to modify the question a little bit, which is to say, because the question that I think about a lot is, how do we motivate the private sector to go about these renovations? And so there are a couple of ways that we are attempting to do that. One is through tax stabilization. We have a pretty cut and dry document that is like, if you meet these standards or have any, one from column A and one from column B, then you can get some tax stabilization, which is a motivator for many businesses to make these changes. And that's been helpful to us. And the other way that we are starting to hopefully motivate some change in the private sector is through what we would call home energy labeling. And that's really for residences. It's not for commercial buildings at this point, but the idea is that we were able to actually pass an ordinance that takes effect this coming July that would require that any homeowner that sells their home has to provide standardized energy information about that home to any potential buyers. And so it takes the information about the home, things like the level of insulation and the kinds of appliances in the home, and standardizes it so that it ideally eliminates the differences that we would see in the different uses of a home, whether you keep it at 90 degrees in the winter or whether you're keeping it at 50 degrees in the winter, that it would sort of eliminate those differences so that potential buyers have an apples to apples kind of comparison across homes, so they can really get a picture of the efficiency of the home, excuse me, and know what they're buying, hopefully before they buy it. And so we'll hopefully be seeing some effects from that ordinance coming up, because we believe that just by giving people better information, that they will make better decisions.
Rob, any thoughts from you on that, maybe that private sector commercial building and what you'd like to see happen there? Are there white roofs or eco roofs? Are you using any sort of kind of carrots or sticks like the mayor is talking about? What are you thinking about for that building?
Mayor Watson, that was a really great prompt for what I was thinking about, talking about the information. We work with a number of commercial buildings through our voluntary building energy challenge. And, for multi-tenant building owners, it is challenging to understand your building's energy performance, because it's difficult to access energy information from multiple tenants. There are programs through the utility, but sometimes they're cumbersome to obtain that data. So I think data and information has to be at the center of all this. We have a benchmarking ordinance that we've been developing over the last few years, and we're hoping to get that passed and to require buildings over 20,000 square feet to report their energy use on an annual basis. And I think that is a first step to really giving the building owners and the renters and everyone the information they need to make decisions. At the same time, it's really important to take advantage of the times when the systems need major overhaul to do retrofits. If you're going to put in a variable refrigerant flow system in a large commercial building, that's a great climate friendly, technology, but, it's expensive unless you're doing a major overhaul. So it's something that, you need to work carefully with, the entire ecosystem, from industry to government to the building managers to encourage that adoption and to guide them and to motivate them. So I think there are carrots and sticks that are needed, but we certainly want to play the role of trying to work collaboratively with everyone to achieve our goals.
I think that's a great goal to have. And generally, I think we've all found that the outcomes then tend to be fairer and to last longer and have more buy-in when we are able to be kind of collaborative as well as we can to kind of put together those carrots and those sticks. On that, and we've touched on renters a couple of times today, so I want to bring in this question from the audience. And to the audience, remember to please go ahead and send us any other questions that you have. But we did have a question around, as we're improving buildings and, hopefully with our older building stock in particular, really making a lot of these upgrades that are so valuable across multiple kinds of ways, the multi-benefit improvements that are going to make these buildings more valuable potentially in the future. Have folks thought about ways to avoid rent increases and displacement as we do that, especially in our residential buildings, but as we think about small businesses as well, can we justify these higher rents? Or is there a way to make sure that we're not hurting low-income renters? I think that's probably something that we're struggling with in multiple states and across the country. So would love to hear any thoughts on that, whoever wants to jump in first.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in there. So that is a great question, and that is something that we certainly have thought about, particularly with the hand-holding program that we had for landlords. One of the important things, one of the aspects of that was important to us was that it was a free service to the landlords to be connected with these resources. Some of which were grants. Now, to be fair, if they are loans, then that would be potentially grounds for an increase in rents. But we haven't seen that data yet, or we don't have any good indicators that has actually happened. To be fair, we're talking about a fairly small sample size from Montpelier, but that it is actually, it's a real concern. Absolutely. And I would be curious to hear if others have other ideas or thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think it is a challenging question. It's a challenging issue when it comes to kind of ensuring that there are both low income as well as just affordable housing options in each community. More and more, I think the realization of the need for more mixed income communities is coming to light, but how to support that process is still a bit of a question, especially when it comes to community development versus gentrification, because oftentimes when we do see communities kind of turning in a certain way, then we do see a lot of people getting displaced. We do have some homestead tax credits that are really supportive to people that can help, especially again, older individuals, to keep them in their houses so that specifically the tax burden isn't becoming too much of a financial burden and doesn't force displacement. And I think for new developments in particular, ensuring that they are devoting a certain number of units to low income housing. But again, that's, I think for Baltimore, there's a lot of reasons to kind of rely on our existing housing stock, especially when it comes to the number of vacant houses that we have across the city. And so part of that is kind of, again, as you're building up communities and getting that influx of people and having, getting properties flipped and things, being really conscious about what the greater kind of like community wide implications of that are. We have really great community level representation with a lot of neighborhood and community associations. And one of the things that we can certainly say is our residents will know when they are not comfortable with something, they will raise it. They will raise it either to the city leadership or administration or even agency staff. And so I think that's really good because we have such like an advocacy spirit here in the city where, people, they say we want to ensure that people can stay in their homes. We want to ensure that the community remains affordable. So I think that's part of it, but there's no easy solution, certainly. And I think there's still a lot to be figured out to kind of like find that delicate balance between those challenges of developing communities and advancing them while ensuring that they're still affordable.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And I know something that some communities around me in Metro Boston have been starting to think about is rental licensing and how you could use potentially that mechanism, not just to require some buildings to be upgraded and to become more energy efficient, to think about some of these measures we've been talking about, but to potentially as well to kind of write in anti-displacement measures or some kind of precautions in that way. So I think a really timely question that I know that folks are really trying to start to figure out some more ways forward with. As we touched as well on the need, obviously, in this space for a ton of both funding and financing help, support for low-income residents and others, that have been overburdened or underserved in the building energy arena, as well as, just to do the types of retrofits that we need to do and employ the types of systems and technologies that we need to do. There's a lot of money that's going to be needed, but there's also right now we're kind of at this interesting moment with federal funding dollars, the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, potentially other infrastructure, other types of dollars coming in to both cities and to states. Wondering, how you all are thinking about using those federal dollars, if there's room or plans to use them toward any of these building decarbonization measures. And yeah, if you have thoughts on either what you're doing or what you might like to do there. Maybe Rob, I'll turn to you first if you have any thoughts.
Well, we have a group of community stakeholders that are working right now to identify priorities for our federal dollars that have come to us. And there's a long list of priorities. I know that the planning department, the sustainability office, a lot of other city departments have been meeting with that group to, encourage, different priorities. But, we one of the things that we're excited about is that we're developing a microgrid at our primary emergency shelter, and it's also a technical high school. So that's one area where we're hoping ultimately to invest. I don't know if it's going to come through those dollars, but we want to make sure those dollars are spent wisely, though.
I'm sure that feeling is somewhat shared, wanting to use them wisely. And I know there's also a lot of priorities and a lot of different ways that money can be spent. How about from the Baltimore or Montpelier perspectives? Any thoughts from either of you on how to leverage those federal funds if you might be able to?
Yeah, sure. So I'm thinking about a couple different pots of money, one being the ARPA funds that we know that we're going to get. So we had such a significant drop in our revenue as a city that the ARPA money is going to mostly go towards canceled projects that was around infrastructure. And then beyond that, we still have, I think, mostly infrastructure related projects. And we may actually be spending some of that money on efforts to address homelessness in the city. So it's sort of somewhat related, I suppose. But then, I'm also thinking about the reconciliation bill, and we have sort of yet to see sort of what the final version of that is actually going to include. But for that kind of money, that would be just a wonderful opportunity for us to really make progress towards our net zero goal. We have this roadmap already for us, in terms of projects that need to be done, weatherization work, fuel switching, et cetera, vehicle switching even that needs to be done that we could start to implement. And we have a price tag on a lot of that work already. And so being able to access some of those funds to just make those changes would be amazing. And beyond that, I could also picture us potentially setting up some programs for particularly for the renting community in Montpelier. And because we know that people with means are going to make the changes on their own. They are going to be fine especially as oil becomes and natural gas becomes more expensive. So really, I think it's our job as the local government to help transition those folks who might not otherwise have either the authority or the means to transition on their own.
Sounds like you're doing some really thoughtful kind of strategizing around those dollars. And Ava, wondering your perspective, how Baltimore currently is thinking about the federal funds.
Yeah, definitely. So there are several different kind of like proposals and projects that different leaders across the city are thinking through. And there's also a community kind of process that's being developed. But Baltimore did receive $6.8 million to support specifically employment development. And so we are hoping that some of that employment development goes to supporting jobs that advance weatherization across the city and energy efficiency. There's also several proposals related to resiliency and climate change. We do have a network of resiliency hubs across the city. I know Rob had mentioned the Resiliency Hub program that was starting in Providence. We do have that program, and it had proven really instrumental in responding to COVID because these were trusted sites in various communities where people were able to get food or get access to masks and other critical needs. And the idea is that in the event of a natural or other disaster, that people can go to these hubs to get some of their critical needs met. My colleague Aubrey Germ has been really great about ensuring, connecting and convening all of the hub leaders. And some of these buildings are churches. Again, some of them are community centers. Some of them have been equipped with solar energy. And so they have, that they're not connected to the grid and they have their own independent energy system. Some of them have generators in case that needs to be used during any particular natural disaster or event. And in many ways, they have become exactly what the community needed them to be. I actually lived 2 doors from one of our resiliency hubs, and they've done a street lighting program on our block, which has been great to ensure safety. So it's just been a really great process. But I think supporting that program is going to be really critical, especially since so much of that work helps to address some of the climate mitigation, or helps to advance, I should say, the climate mitigation approaches that we're trying to take as we continue to get ahead of some of the impacts of climate change that we're all dealing with. And that, again, we know that the people with the fewest resources in our city are definitely dealing with in some of the most challenging ways. So I was looking forward to see those funds allocated there. And I think really we're going to see some real innovations come out of a lot of that funding. Another colleague is working on an outdoor learning program that actually really advanced quite a bit during the pandemic, kind of unexpectedly, but really getting children connected more to nature. My colleague Abby Cox, she leads that program, and as providing that opportunity, one, for students to socially distance while learning outdoors has been really critical. And so supporting the advancement of that program at different schools across the city is actually going to be really critical and key, but also getting children in nature and connecting them to nature so they can enjoy both the mental and the physical benefits of being outside. And so those are just some examples of some of the things from our office that are being considered. But I think we're going to see a lot of other innovative and really exciting things that come out of the city with that support, and it's much needed funding. And so I think from a lot of cities, we'll see some really exciting work.
It's great to hear how innovatively and holistically Baltimore and your other cities are really thinking about this, and obviously, you know, helping to recover as well as really rebuild and kind of move toward the future. And you referenced several times, and obviously, you know, we've all kind of been doing work somewhat differently during the pandemic in many different ways. And I think most of us would agree that those who are hardest hit by the pandemic are often those who are also hardest hit by climate change. And so how closely those two kind of groups can hew And I think that brings us to another good question from our audience here about how your plans and programs in your communities, have they changed over the past year and a half due to the ongoing pandemic? And the person asking the question, I think, was really specifically thinking about, the commercial building stock and how these buildings are evolving and how your approaches maybe to supporting these buildings are evolving. Any thoughts on how that kind of that intersection between your commercial building stock and those owners and tenants have or are changing, over the course of the pandemic?
Well, I think more and more we're seeing that it's incredibly important for leadership in cities and in jurisdictions across the country to remain nimble, to be able to respond to both natural disasters and public health challenges. And I think part of that is also just relying on the community knowledge, relying on, obviously there are experts, but so much of the response from our end really showed us how folks who were on the ground, community-based organizations really stepped up, and they had just such a great pulse of what was going on. And so the more that we can kind of like share that power, share in decision-making power when it comes to how to address existing and future challenges, particularly as it relates to that intersection of public health and the environment, really just leaning on a broader range of perspectives to contribute to the problem solving, and realizing that there's never any one solution. And it is such an iterative process. And I think that's something that we've really engaged and leaned into here, and just always kind of rethinking and kind of questioning whether or not we're doing things right and what it is that we need to change, and when and if we have to just adjust or adapt. And I think as climate change continues to create challenges, we have to continue to be nimble in that way, to respond to it in ways that may have been very different from in the past. So.
Unless Anne or Rob want to jump in, and please do if you want to. But I was going to take that and kind of run with it. I think your comment about needing to be flexible and adaptive, and kind of leaning into that sharing with community groups and kind of others in order to do this problem solving, and how important that is, and hopefully that's something we carry forward with all of us. I'd love to speak and give you each a chance to kind of respond to what is something that we can help our audience to think about for how to deal with a challenge that's come up related to building decarbonization, energy efficiency, those intersections with equity and public health and so on? Do you have an example of a challenge in your work that you can share with us, that maybe you're still muddling through and trying to figure out how to navigate, or maybe you've helped come to some sort of productive outcome and it's something that folks in the audience can learn from? I see you nodding, Rob, so I might go to you first and then encourage Anne and Ava to jump in as well.
Sure. So we had developed a community choice aggregation program that allows our residents and business utility customers to join together through the power of aggregation to green up their energy supply and in a cost-effective manner. It's a program that you're probably very familiar with in Massachusetts. But when we were developing that program, we wanted to really center equity and collaborative governance in our processes. So we developed a survey to really collect input from the broad community on how they want that program to be designed. And we were having trouble getting enough participation from our low and moderate income residents. And so we went out with some community stakeholders, and we extended the deadline for that survey and paid people to take the surveys intentionally to make sure we got a good representative total. And that was really important because the net result of that survey is that we needed to really make sure affordability rose to the top of how that program was designed. And when, a lot of the advocates that have been working in the clean energy space have long sought to have 100% clean energy. And, I personally am able to pay for 100% wind power for my house through Green Energy Consumers Alliance, but affordability is a big challenge for a lot of people. And so, when we got that plan passed through City Council, its base program was centered on being affordable below the utility rate. So that's how the program is designed. And it was really thanks to that extra effort we made to outreach that we were able to bring that to the front.
I think that's so important. I know that's something that we've been, continuing to try to iterate and evolve with the green municipal aggregation, community choice aggregation programs here in Massachusetts too, and that community buy-in and sharing and being able to pay people for their time and making sure that you're really getting a representative sampling of voices is so important. Anne or Ava, any thoughts or questions on that or another challenge that you might want to share with us?
Yeah, sure. Well, just to jump back a little bit to answer the previous question, we certainly have had a lot of our plans shift due to COVID. We had some plans moving forward, but they were put on hold because we knew our community was pretty hard hit financially. And so it was not the right time to put bonds on the table. And so, we're in the space of waiting till seeing when the time is right to do that, particularly for our commercial sector. We have a lot of small businesses here in Montpelier, and we know that through COVID, that benefited a lot of really big businesses as, business shifted towards big business. And so for a lot of them, their focus was not on spending money to save money, as a lot of sustainability work is, where you've got to put something up front as the infrastructure investment, but rather their focus was just survival. And we seem to be coming out of that space now, which is really excellent. And so that is actually somewhat related, I guess, to my answer to your other question here about dealing with challenges. Just thinking about, it's so interesting to hear Rob and Ava from how your cities work. Thinking about this community choice aggregation program, which sounds like it's through it's an electricity program. Is that accurate? Because the city of Montpelier doesn't run the electric utility here, or the city of Montpelier does not have authority over the public education, in terms of connecting kids to the outdoors. I mean, we do have recreation programs, but it's just interesting to hear how our communities are set up just differently. And so one of the other challenges that we have as a municipality is that Vermont is what's called a Dillon state. And that is just the way our municipality and state government is arranged. So, which is to say that municipalities in Vermont are not allowed to make any old ordinance that we want to. We actually have to be given express permission from the state government to make an ordinance about something. And so this home energy labeling initiative that we had, that we, is going to go into effect in July, we actually had to have permission from the state to do that. And that process of getting permission took a couple of years. And so just thinking about there was some waiting involved. It meant taking those steps and planning and being ready for when the time was ripe to move forward. But it took a couple of years for us to get here. And so there's unfortunately some patience involved, but we know we have to take those steps in order to get to that finish line. So that's one thing. It's just having the long view, right? If we don't start now, then when are we going to start? So that's my approach. we gotta get moving. So even if it's just with the first step.
I think that's a really good lesson to remember. Some of this stuff is going to take a very long time and be very challenging, but we have to get started and we have to be moving on all cylinders so that we can get as much done as possible. Ava, a different type of governance setup in Baltimore, in many of our cities and towns that might be tuning in to, a lot of these programs, I think, and measures and different policies are applicable in different jurisdictions, but they'll have to fit into that context of each of your own governance and government structures. Any comments that you want to make or questions about either of Rob or Anne's challenges, or a challenge that you want to throw into the bunch for our audience to consider? And we'll be wrapping up in just a couple minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to say that, we're in the midst, we actually had a climate action fellow that started today, and in the midst of engaging in our climate action plan update or our CAP update, which is going to be a year-long community engagement process to better understand from the perspective of our great residents here in Baltimore City, what they want to see from the city in terms of climate actions in general, what are the actions they want to see in terms of adaptation and mitigation, and how to help us better understand what the equity implications for that need to be. So we're really excited for that, and I think it is those kinds of really intentional and well-resourced engagement approaches that provide such a broad range of ideas, and it makes that ideation process so much more rich. And yeah, I mean, we don't know what it will look like after a year, but really excited to address the question about kind of like, how to engage communities on this topic. And I just for Mayor Watson and Rob, I would love to know kind of what you all feel like the number one kind of climate adaptation or mitigation approach is going to be in your respective cities over the next year. And I think I'll just say for Baltimore, I do really think it'll be our approaches to extreme heat that are going to be the what we see is really taking a lot of that we're going to be putting a lot of resources towards.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there. It's a great question. And I'm glad to know that, what you all are facing is these heat islands. That is super interesting. I know very little about that. So it's interesting to hear about that. We are anticipating that Vermont is going to get a lot more precipitation as a result of climate change. And so one of the things that we are thinking about is our water and our stormwater infrastructure, and how, we have our water infrastructure here is about 100 years old. We no longer have cedar pipes fitted together under our roads. We replaced all the cedar piping, but we nonetheless, we do experience a lot of water main breaks due to the increased freeze-thaw cycles. And we also just anticipate the potential for more flooding. Montpelier is a valley, and so we do experience some flooding now, and we anticipate that will get worse. So having really robust stormwater infrastructure is going to be really important. So we're rethinking even how we fund that, so we can be more on top of it.
Yeah, in Providence, we recently went through Hurricane Henry was headed straight towards Providence in the last 24 hours, and that was a big wake-up call for a lot of people, because having lived on the Gulf Coast for a while, I know that the hurricanes and a lot of these storm events can only be front of mind after you've experienced them. You don't necessarily, it's hard to think ahead and plan ahead, but in the city of Providence, heat islands, as I said earlier, is a big priority for us, as is energy resilience. Finding ways to equitably provide the opportunity for all of our residents to have access to those essential needs and services in the event of an emergency, I think is one of our top priorities.
Well, that's wonderful, and thank you, Ava, for prompting that question. It was so interesting to hear from each of you when you had to synthesize down to kind of one thought for what you'll be focusing a lot of your work on. I know there's so many things that are all encompassed in the building decarbonization and energy efficiency space, but it really helps to think holistically and bring in all of these different factors, as well as we've talked so much today about the different community groups and ways of really thinking about our low and moderate income residents, renters, and others that have been underserviced throughout decades, if not longer, in our communities, and how we kind of work everybody into our climate action plan. So I thank everyone so much for their thoughtful engagement, both my three esteemed panelists here today, as well as all those in the audience. I know we didn't get to, there were some last minute questions that came in about more questions about the selection process for the energy rating system, and they're in Montpelier, for wondering about if folks are working with ESCOs to serve their public buildings, some other questions about outreach to landlords. So we couldn't get to absolutely everything today, but think we had a far-ranging and really interesting discussion. And I thank everyone for taking part in it today, and for the time and attention everyone gave. So I just wanted to again thank our panelists, thank our audience, thank NEEP, and all of those for this opportunity to kick off these summit sessions with NEEP this year, for this really engaging and thought-provoking conversation. So as we wrap up, I hope everyone will stay engaged in with the work of these three exciting front-runner cities, in the work that we're going to learn about through the rest of these summit sessions, I know, and looking forward to it. So hope to see you all there. Goodbye for now, and best wishes for enjoying the rest of these exciting NEEP sessions. Thanks, everyone.
Hello. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Mayor Ann, always great to see you. And Rob, thank you. And hearing about Baltimore, this has been a fantastic session. So thank you all for your time, your energy, and your partnership, as we look forward to seeing what the next couple of years brings and helping you all working collaboratively to achieve your energy and carbon reduction goals. So thank you so much. You didn't get to answer all of those questions, but feel free to use the chat function. If there's anything that you didn't get to say that you want to share, feel free to put them into the chat. So welcome, everybody. I'm Carolyn Sarno-Goldthwaite, Senior Director at NEEP, and I'm very glad that you're all here today. There were a lot of great familiar names that had signed up for the summit, and we're so glad that you're here. There's also a lot of great new names, so welcome if this is your first time. We're very happy to have you. I wanted to just take a moment to thank one of our gold sponsors today, and that is Mitsubishi. So we want to thank them not only for being a sponsor of the summit, but also for being a NEEP ally since 2017. So thank you so much for your partnership. Hope you're enjoying that first session. We saw a lot of folks were putting in some Q&A into the question box. The very fitting, but the very first person to put a chat in to our chat box was our founder and former executive director, Sue Coakley. So thank you, Sue, for chatting in. You probably saw also that I had also put a message in there, but let's all take a moment right now. I know it's difficult. You don't get to see, I heard about the coffee earlier. I'm with you. I always love to go up at a conference and get a cup of coffee, or through happy hour, or just being outside or on escalators and being like, hey, let's connect. It's hard to do that. It's really hard right now because you're not seeing who's on the other side of the screen. So what we'd love for you to do is just take a moment and chat in and just say hello. Let us know where you're from. You heard that folks were listening in from all across the country. So chat in a little bit about where you're from, and maybe say hello, make a new connection, or tell us what you're hoping to get out of the summit. What are you hoping to learn over the next few days? So let's just take a moment and see who's going to chat in. I know so many of you are not shy, or you're going to leave me hanging and not chat in anything. So let's see. So we'll give it a moment and see if people chat into the chat function or not. We'll see. Somebody will, I'm sure, besides Sue Coakley. She was first. She started us off first. All right. So as I said, please use the Q&A function if you have questions for the different sessions, and then also use that chat function. And that chat function is if you want to just agree, or if you're want to elaborate further on maybe a point, or you have something to share throughout the day. So you can do that today, tomorrow, or on Wednesday. So our next session, which we're going to get to momentarily, is going to be about schools. It's going to be the lessons from the pandemic, which I find very fitting because I have, when I first came to NEEP, I came as the high performance schools manager over 15 years ago, and I'm actually back in the NEEP office right now. We're voluntarily coming back in, and it's nice to be here. I do have my mask with me, but we were all sitting outside, a few of us, and someone was asking me how I got into this space. I'm a reform facilities manager. I used to work for the city of Newton, so I really appreciated hearing the perspective from that last panel. But schools are near and dear to my heart because that's where I started at NEEP, and now I'm the senior director, but it's been great to kind of think of the evolution of the work that we've been doing with schools over the past 20 some odd years. Since 2002, NEEP has been working on schools. So what I'd like to do is to welcome my panelists onto the stage, the virtual stage. seems like, I don't know if you want to pretend to be walking, you can saunter on stage, Erica.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Wave, a little wave to the crowd. Yes. Before we start, I do want to note that Ken Wirtz, who's the Executive Director of the Mass Facilities Administrators Association, thank you for joining us today. Ken is not presenting and driving. Ken he is not. He is in his car, and because he is on location, as he often is. He's where's Waldo? Where's Ken? Ken is always somewhere out and about in Massachusetts, working with stakeholders, and that he's on the road today. So we appreciate him making the time to be with us. But I just want to assure everybody that you are not driving your car. You're right, Ken.
I'm not. I'm waiting for the auto drive function to come in because I can get so much work done behind the wheel. Right?
Napping, right?
No, laptop, check emails, all that kind of fun stuff. I really need a driver.
The amount of conversations I've had with you, Ken, of like deep nerdy quality, though, while you've been on the road is pretty special. So yeah. I don't think we could do this any other way.
Yes, any other ways. All right. Well, let's get started. Let's dive in. So today's, this next topic is called, session 2 is Lessons from the Pandemic, Reimagining Schools. So as I said, when I started at NEEP over 15 years ago, I was the High Performance Schools Manager. And back then, when we were thinking about schools were the low-hanging fruit for energy efficiency. We started a regional project because we wanted to make schools high performance, what was then called high performance. Well, fast forward, it's 2021, and we're not talking about high performance so much anymore, because that also was confusing and people thought it was about test scores. We're now talking about zero energy and zero carbon schools. And we're starting to see that there's been some movement when it comes to schools and the way that schools are constructed, but perhaps not necessarily existing school buildings. And certainly not all school buildings are constructed, operated, and maintained in an energy efficient and healthy ways. Unfortunately, as we all know with COVID, it put a glaring spotlight on our communities. It put a glaring spotlight on the inequities of our school buildings and the fact that our school buildings could not handle the amount of fresh air that they were being told they needed to put in, or the filters they needed to be put in because their HVAC equipment couldn't handle them. So we're going to have a half an hour conversation about the current state of schools and how did we get here? But more importantly, how are we going to continue to evolve our school buildings to make sure that they are resource efficient, healthy, energy efficient environments for all? So with that, I'd like to welcome Erica. Dr. Etlin, why don't you go first, introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about what you're bringing to the table today.
Totally. So thanks so much for having me. And it's funny because as I was reflecting on this intro, I actually got to meet all of you in 2016 when we were still talking about healthy schools. And back then I was sort of the doctoral student at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. So today I'm kind of providing the applied research and kind of public health lens for this work. So naturally I'm going to be quite biased in what part of this puzzle we need to be thinking about. But I am also the director of the Human Experience Lab at Perkins and Will. So really thinking about how are schools unique compared to maybe other building types, and where do we sort of optimize our student and teacher performance in those spaces. So really happy to be here. And Ken is sort of the master Jedi on all this for me. So it's really fun to be here with both of you.
Oh, you've given him a new title.
Yes.
Oh, geez. I'm just a dot connector. You know that. Carolyn, my turn now.
Erica, it is your turn.
Sorry,
it is your
thank
turn.
You. We've known each other a long time. Wow. So you've been, I remember you back when. So I come to this from a reformed facilities director as well. I was the facilities director in Sharon, Mass, a little bit south of Boston, for about 16, 17 years-ish, off and on, and shifted and morphed into the role of executive director for the Mass Facilities Administrators Association. We are a nonprofit professional association that supports all public facilities directors throughout Massachusetts. So it's providing professional development, networking opportunities, lobbying for legislative changes at our state and federal government that are going to impact how we're funding school maintenance. So I feel blessed that I get to help all the kids in Massachusetts, and hopefully I get to help kids outside of Massachusetts as well through events like this. So thank you, Carolyn, for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you both for joining. So let's dive in. So
how do you think we got here? So I think we all saw, splashed across the newspapers for the last year and a half was, the focus on schools, the fact that kids couldn't go back to school because of the ventilation system in school buildings. But I think even before COVID, chronically, always, there are stories about budget gaps within our communities. And the number one reason that people generally tend to move to a community is because of the school system if you have school-age children. And so schools also are the center of communities where people come to congregate to, take classes. They're used for parks and recreation. They're not just used for 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. anymore. They're really truly the center of the community. So knowing all of that, how do you think we got here? So we're going to start with how we got here, and then how can we make sure that we get out of it? So Erica, do you want to start?
Sure. So I think for me, again, reflecting that sort of research background, I would say we got here over decades of hard or maybe not so hard work, in the sense that, we do have 30 years of research that shows that indoor air quality matters. We have, reports back in the 90s showing that our ventilation was failing in a lot of schools at incredibly high rates. And so you have sort of these, although I think all of us know the power of a CO2 level now, I mean, we did show that we had CO2 levels 3-5 times the safe limit in these school buildings. And that had an effect on people's performance, our students, their, attention, their allergies and asthma. And so I think there was a public health crisis that was already there. And I think one of the important pieces of this is that we play environmental whack-a-mole in so many ways, where the mole is whatever the key crisis and what we have attention for at that time. So it might have been asbestos before, it could have been lead in our drinking water or in our paint. And, we are spending our time and attention on addressing those things. And I think the hard part is that if the mole disappears and we haven't addressed that problem, it still remains. And so my feeling is, how did we also get here happens from a financial perspective. You can have all the research in the world, but if you're not sort of having it experienced directly, I think there's this real challenge of the science of the invisible, where there might be districts that have no idea that the air quality is impacting them. And so, and I'm sure, Ken will get into this much more, but something that really for me was instrumental was just seeing how much we spend on our school buildings nationally, and that we only spend 1% more on our school buildings now than we did back in 2009. So this is telling me that our buildings haven't been invested in properly to address those health concerns. And, after the 2008 recession, we put building moratoriums on states like Rhode Island, and, schools and students were really getting sort of the downstream effect of it. So I would say that this has been a slow and steady storm that's been building, that the research told us early, and now we're in a place where we can't really avoid it. And the finances need to kind of come up and sort of help us solve this problem.
Ken?
That's a very optimistic view, Erica. I like that you bring that to the table, because some days I just get so saddened by the whole state of where we're at. So how did we get here? I think it's still going on a little bit, but much like Erica had mentioned, is continual defunding of facilities maintenance and operations, specifically in schools. And what I've seen through my work as a facilities director, a lot of times the people that are making decisions on the budgets don't understand facilities. They're educators, superintendents, school committee members, teachers union presidents. And you try to explain, you try to break down, you try to rationale why we need a new HVAC tech, why we need to put in better filters, but they're more concerned about the number of students in the classroom, which is also important. Don't get me wrong. I want teachers' aides in the classrooms. I want all the support systems in the educational environment, but we can't do it at the sake of cutting our maintenance departments. It's a continued repetition of underfunding. It's 3% doesn't cut it, especially with the way buildings are coming online now. With high-performing buildings, the technology is more expensive to fix, more expensive to repair, more expensive to maintain. That being said, it provides a healthier indoor air environment for all of our teachers and students. So it's great, but you can't not fund it. Just because you have a new building, you know, that's the misnomer. And Carol and I have talked this to death. That's the misnomer. Oh, it's a new building. It's going to cost less. No, no, it's actually going to cost more. It's going to be more labor. There's more moving parts, but the environment is going to be better conducive for better learning and teaching. So it's, I don't know. I do like the whack-a-mole reference. I talk about that a lot. People forget. My biggest concern right now, we'll talk about it later, is people have already moved on past the pandemic. Right? Everyone's already like, oh, well, no, now it's budget cut season. Oh, we need to do this. This summer in New England, we had so much rain. Everyone's dealing with mold. Yep. How are we going to get the school open? We have mold in it. Okay. Aren't you worried about being ready for the pandemic? No. We need to focus on mold. So it's always a moving target. I don't know if we've gotten out of it yet. I'm a little concerned that we're thinking that this federal stimulus that's coming is going to be, you know, the end all be all.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think I agree with you. I think it's a whack-a-mole, right? And I always say that, especially around the community's work and our schools' work, it's tripping over dollar bills to pick up pennies, because they only see kind of that first cost, not the long-term cost, and the fact that sometimes you do need to spend a little bit of money, but there are other benefits like health benefits. And Erica, you and I talk about this a lot. It's not energy efficiency or health, it's energy efficiency and health. So. Yep. Let's talk a little bit more about that. There is a lot of money that is coming to states and to local governments that are now trying to figure out what to do. And you have a lot of listening ears right now, a lot of folks like the panelists before, and some of the state leaders that are coming tomorrow, who all are getting this funding and trying to figure out, what do you do? And I think that is a big concern, that it's not a stopgap, right? How do we make sure that we're using this money effectively? So let's talk a little bit about that. How do we come out of this? And how do we stop playing whack-a-mole? Yeah. How do we stop tripping over dollar bills to pick up pennies? Do you either of you have thoughts on how we can, you know, get off this? Or I guess maybe we're at a carnival, a merry-go-round, because I was going to say, let's get off the merry-go-round right now. So how do we do it?
Just keep on going.
Just keep on going. Like how are we going to get off? Right.
I mean, the biggest discovery I found during the past year and a half is the amount of building evaluations and retro commissioning and studies that were performed on schools, at least in New England, showing what was working, what wasn't working. But not everyone did that. So What are we doing with all this money that's coming to us? Hopefully there's a couple of short-term goals and long-term goals. I mean, the guidance that we're trying to provide our members, at least, is that first, do an audit, figure out what you have, figure out if it's working, if it's not working, fix it. Make it working as efficiently as it was designed and intended to operate. Then is the next step. Then it's the capital planning. How do we replace this unit so that way we can have MERV 13 filters? How can we replace these units to get air conditioning in the building so that way we can maintain a stable relative humidity? But that's a long-term goal, because a lot of those, and I won't bore you with I think I told you my analogy, if you give a mouse a cookie, Laura Numeroff's book, a la HVAC, right? You go to gut the HVAC because you want air conditioning. Well, when you remove the HVAC, you also have to move asbestos. Oh, just the pipes? No, the floors, the ceilings, the pipes as well. And now you want to put back AC, so now you need to upgrade the entire switchgear for the building. It's a project. It's a holistic approach to solving these bigger problems. But the bigger problem we have right now is that I talked to a lot of communities that brought in these consultants a year ago to see how their HVAC systems are running. That was a year ago. Carolyn, you're a reform facilities person. How long do belts run in a rooftop exhaust unit?
Well, I used to have to beg to have motors rewound, that $100 many times.
$100, yeah, because you can save money. But those are the things that people think, oh, well, we had a company in here a year ago and they checked everything and everything should be fine. We don't have a maintenance department. We don't have a facilities director. And we don't have a budget for long-term plans because the federal government's going to take care of it all. Well, I bet 25% of the equipment that everyone confirmed was running last year, and I don't want to scare people, if they haven't been doing their due diligence and doing their preventive maintenance on this, equipment fails. It just does. It's moving parts.
So taking that though, and I think it's all valid points, right? It's the same constant cycle. What would you tell your communities? What would you tell them to do with this money?
I think for me to jump in, I think, I agree with Ken. I think we desperately need an assessment, but we need an assessment of our buildings that is more health focused. And so I think for me, it's how can you make this money have sort of long-term benefits for that school building? And to me, this assessment is the first step, because to Ken's point, this isn't going to solve all of our problems, but it at least can sort of highlight what they are. And so to me, when you put a lens of health on one of these assessments, I mean, it's great. Like I love Massachusetts. I love, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, because they do this school survey, and very few states in the country actually do that in any sort of meaningful cadence. However, even when you look at that data, and as, which was the basis of my PhD work, it was always proxy health measures. We didn't actually know what was the ventilation rate. We didn't know what the acoustics were in that space. Is there background noise caused by, outdoor sources, or is it because of thinking about the HVAC itself because it's noisy and old? So there's these opportunities, I think, right now for us to address the fact that there are lots of moles in our yard. And what are those key metrics across these different environmental parameters, acoustics, daylighting, air quality, water quality, that we can do? Because to me, I think it's sort of a threefold situation that we need to be addressing. One is just equity. I think that's something that if we continue to require our school buildings to reach out and say, hey, we need money, we need support, the people who are overburdened are always going to be the ones who are last to be supported, because they can't file the applications. They can't sort of go and, access those resources in a way that we think is equitable. I think the second piece is the efficiency. If we only have a finite pool of money available to us because of this one-time piece, then efficiency, we need to be putting the money where the biggest problems are. And so unless you know the numbers and the metrics, you can't actually solve for what those are. And I think lastly, it's a public health piece. Where can we have the biggest wins? I don't want little wins. I don't want buildings that, are actually have great facility managers like, previous Carolyn or Ken, who know how to keep an eye on things, make sure things are maintained properly, all of this. And they're the ones who constantly are the ones getting the resources and hey, I want everyone to have resources, don't get me wrong. But I think the real challenge is that the places that would benefit the most, have the biggest indoor air quality benefits or acoustics or daylighting or any of these, those are the people who we want to have that win. Because if we think about it again through equity, efficiency, and public health, those kids are going to have the most sort of change in their built environment so that we can support them. And so I think it's obviously an assessment, like Ken said, but it has to have sort of health baked into it. And what are those metrics that actually are deciding the difference of people's sort of educational outcomes, to me, is where we kind of have to start. It's not enough to say, is this broken or is it fixed? But is it actually, how broken is it? And where can we put that money first, to be honest?
So I'll just do one quick plug just to make sure for those listening in to, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A again, or if you want to be part of this conversation, just put in some messages, thumbs up, thumbs down, you like things in the chat, feel free to do that. But Eric, I think you just raised three really important points, and I'm interested in Ken's reflection on this as working with some of your stakeholders, which is the application process, because you're right that it's starting first with like feasibility studies and schematic design. Like it's very expensive to even do a study if you're going to do a new school, let alone like looking at the full landscape of your existing school buildings. So I think there's the application process, which should be streamlined, which I think is a great recommendation, bless you, to states. I also think I'll amend that too to say that it also has to stop being a silo of just the departments of education working by themselves, but also with the utilities and with the energy offices and other stakeholders, metrics, the metrics for which they're benchmarked against, and also just the Massachusetts example, which is a great one, I think, to follow, which basically that school buildings or communities have to make sure they're maintaining their school facilities before you then get that money to retrofit or build a new school. Rhode Island actually did a similar model by following what Massachusetts had done a number of years ago. And I think that that is a good process to follow, because otherwise I think communities kind of sit back and maybe let them fall into disrepair, those school buildings. So Ken, what's your reaction to that?
I don't know if they intentionally let them fall into a state of disrepair. I think it's an unknown for them. And Erica, just for clarification, neither Carolyn nor I were provided all the resources we needed to maintain our public facilities. I can assure you of that.
But I think the leadership, though, that you both show, like the fact that we're on this panel, I think there's something also that's important, is that to me, and Ken, this is why I love you so much, is the fact that, you know, facility managers do more for your health on any given day than your primary care provider. So when we're talking about who is in charge of your health, I want like any facility manager on this call right now to feel empowered to like fight like hell, like you and Carolyn had to do and continue to do, because these things are connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. And it's the continued education of superintendents, of school committees, of the mass teachers, you know, the teachers unions, everyone, to understand the impacts of the decisions they're making. With the funding that's coming, it's great, and it's going to do a lot of amazing work. But is anyone looking at 3 years from now, 5 years from now? Do people have a realistic expectation of what it's going to take from an annual appropriation standpoint to maintain this level of service that our customers have become used to? Our customers want 100% fresh air makeup. Our customers want HEPA filters in every classroom. Our customers want all high touch points cleaned 3 times a day, sanitized. Those are unrealistic expectations with the current funding strategy that we have for our maintenance departments. And that's across the entire country, probably globally. Post-COVID, everyone wants, you know, energy conservation was out the window, right? Oh, bring in all as much fresh air as you can. If you need more fresh air, crack open the windows in the middle of winter. Well, okay, I get it. We're fighting a pandemic, and we can do that for a short period of time. But you're looking at some significant budget. Some of the larger districts that are our members, we were talking the other day, and for them to shift from MERV 8 filters to MERV 13 filters, it costs them around $60,000 to $70,000 a year out of their operations budget. So some small communities, that's quadruple what they have for their entire HVAC budget. You know, districts are looking at, you know, I have 5 buildings, I have $10,000 a year to buy filters. Well, now you quadruple that, and we're just going to rely on the federal funding to do that. It's not a long-term solution, and that's what I'm concerned about. And that I'm seeing is that the discussion of talking about annual operations budgets, you know, like Carolyn mentioned, when you submit your maintenance plan, you also submit your maintenance budget. How much are you spending per pupil based on the age of your building, based on what you're maintaining? It's really digging in deep in the data and answering those hard questions. People want the easy answer. Well, how much should I raise my utilities? Well, it depends on, you know, what your building is. If it's a 1950s building with steam heat, it's going to be completely different than a CHIPS certified building that was just wrapped up in 2019. They're different animals, and they're both in your same community. So there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think one of the silver linings of COVID is that people are starting to finally understand how much of an importance the actual building facilities maintenance cleaning impacts the overall health of occupants. Yeah. So if there's anything good that we can take away from it, it's that people are at least starting to talk about it.
One other question for you, and we also have a question that came into the chat that I want to get to in just one second, because I think you also, what you're talking about kind of resonates with me in a different way, which is another favorite topic, and that's workforce. Because all of the dampers being open and the increase of airflow coming into these school buildings now, and you raised the question about energy costs, but the fact that how many of these dampers are going to be left open now for the next umpteen years.
Well, think about the whole whack-a-mole concept. Back in the 80s, when we had the oil crisis, all facility directors went out and physically shut the dampers to 5%.
Yep. For
years. Yeah. Even the oil crisis was over, you'd still go find them mechanically shut, screwed to a 5% opening. CO2, indoor air quality didn't matter because that's what was the hot button at that time. So right now, this summer, we had several schools that couldn't open because of mold issues this summer. Why did they have mold issues? Their dampers were set at 100% open, bringing in 95% humid air and just cycling all that swamp, air through our buildings. The buildings can't respond. The favorite button that controls people use in schools is override, right?
Yep.
Oh, Mrs. Smith feels chilly, override. Mrs. Smith retired 15 years ago, but her classroom always stays at 78 degrees.
Yeah. So Erica, what's your thought on the kind of the workforce side of things, or the lack of? We know that there's a gap in the number of qualified or even just available facilities or maintenance building operators. I think just industry-wide, everywhere in the world right now, we have a work shortage. But even more so now, we have a huge gap right now in facilities managers and custodians, but they play, as you said, such a critical role in the health of the building occupants. So do you have any reflections or thoughts on that piece of it?
I think, and again, it's informed by conversations with you and Ken, so I think we're all in this together. But I think, especially coming from an architectural firm right now, again, if we get these assessments back and it shows that 80% of our school buildings are not actually functioning well for health, they might have been working on off, but weren't actually functioning for health. That means that there's a huge unmet need that we need to address. And so for me, I think in terms of workforce, we're going to need more money, more resources to be able to go into that, not only to make sure that we can have people come and work on those buildings, but to actually train the people who need to have the skills to be able to do the HVAC work, to be able to construct these new spaces. We have sort of this deficit of people who are actually able and qualified to build these spaces. And so even if we got all of the money in the world, the workforce is sort of our limiting factor here. And I think just real quick, I want to loop back to something Ken was saying before, which is this cost of which our buildings are now sort of, we think are so much higher. But from a health perspective, I kind of want to make a quick metaphor of how long have we been eating fast food for, $1 for a meal, when really we should have been eating healthier pieces, and that wasn't what was subsidized. That's not what was supported. And so now we're in this place of needing the healthy meal because we've been sick for so long and are struggling obesity crises and all this stuff. And so to me, I think as we start to rebalance this equation of energy or health or, what does it take to actually run a modernized school building, I think we have to just be very honest about what that takes, and to not, our baseline was so low that anything is going to feel a lot higher than that. And so how do we sort of think about it in a way that is, we're just real honest about where we fell short collectively?
So there's excellent point. There's a question that came in, which I think this goes back to the metrics discussion before, but it's an idea around policy, which is getting both of your thoughts on performance standards. If you're familiar with building performance standards, kind of the evolution from benchmarking, where you benchmark your building, heard that on the last panel, but then building performance standards, making sure that you set that target. What do you all think about a policy for school buildings that is around energy, carbon emissions, or indoor air quality metrics that would be required, like something that would be tied to state funding? Could there be a policy crafted for our schools, all schools, not just the new schools, but especially existing schools, that kind of set that benchmark that all schools had to strive for? What do you think of that? I know, Erica, you're a big proponent of setting that we have to focus on metrics and setting different metrics than we have now. Do you want to start with that, or your reflections on it?
Well, Ken's smiling because he knows I'm biased on certain things like this. I think what, is really exciting for me to see, and again, this is perhaps my naivete, but incredible optimism, or at least cautious optimism, is that, right now in this last year, we had a bill in Massachusetts, which is this Healthy and Green bill. It's kind of up for discussion and debate, but, led by Senator Comerford. And to me, the first part of it is trying to identify those metrics and what needs to be done. Have they figured out the money components yet? I don't think so. But I do think it's, at least having this conversation and getting it into some more formalized policy place to see, okay, well, if this goes through, what made it successful, who needs to be at the table then once we say, all right, you have the green light. Or if it fails and we have this incredible policy opportunity on a platter, why did it fail? Because we are going to need to revisit these exact issues, I think, nationally. And, I feel lucky that Massachusetts gets to lead in a lot of ways, but I think there needs to be a greater sort of deep dive of how do we kind of connect this to the finances, where, like metrics of success for schools and students, if we were letting schools get funding for how well their kids did on a test, I mean, the school building was dictating how well they did on that test. So it was an unfair assessment in the sort of delivery of those resources from the first place. So I don't know. I think there's good work done. We got a lot to do still.
A lot more. Ken, do you want to give just do you have a quick rebuttal or response to that before we close out? I have one last quick one. A real quick one.
You leave it with that?
No, I have one last real quick question for you. But
so benchmarking scares the living hell out of me. Because the data is only as good as the person that's putting it in. So to consider that you're going to benchmark your community against the community beside you, you could be comparing apples and oranges, right? So we've seen that a lot, and I appreciate it. And I used to use a portfolio manager to track my energy consumption, all that kind of fun stuff. But what I found is it's much better data for me to track my own buildings against my own buildings, because then I know what I'm looking at. As far as the metrics and the data points, there's a tricky piece and a tricky nuance that falls in with any state funding. So say the state funding sets up this metrics and you hit an EUI of, the 25 or whatever. Woohoo! You qualify, you get the big bag of money, whatever that is. Does the state come back and audit? What if you're not operating under that? Now does the state take that money back? And these are the questions that legislators think about a lot, either fortunately or unfortunately. Now, I think I'm a quasi-politician. My father gets a good chuckle out of that because I always used to give him a hard time being a salesman. But if there's those nuances that are in there that, okay, we're going to set these standards, we're going to set these parameters, and we're going to give you funding based off of that. If you don't make those marks that you said you were going to, you lose your money. Only you have to pay us back. So where does that fall? Because right now we're lucky enough that there's funding available and people are giving it based off of, oh, here's what we're going to do. We're going to replace our HVAC system and put in MERV 13s.
Yeah.
Not, oh, we're going to hit this target. Tricky.
It is.
You didn't give me enough time.
I didn't know, and I'm leaving us of sorts in a cliffhanger because we're going to delve into this, I think, at a later time, because it is a good discussion in that. If you don't set targets and you don't have these metrics, then you're not going to, I don't think we're going to come out of this. We're not going to get off the merry-go-round, off the whack-a-mole. So you have to have them. So we're going to put, unfortunately, a pin in that because we're just about at time. But I want to end with one last question for you both. I started with the headlines that we're seeing and the challenges, and you knew this was coming. So 5 years from now, what do the headlines say about schools? Where are we 5 years from now? What is your, well, I know I won't say optimistic or not because I know the two of you. So 5 years from now, what does the headline say about schools?
I'll let Ken go first.
I think the headline's going to read, toxic pollen bloom causes schools to shut off all fresh air intake. That's back to our whack-a-mole theory. We're going to move on to the next big thing. I think that the headlines will read that there is some better understanding of what needs to be done. I think it's going to take a while for people to understand. I mean, we've been talking about it forever. We're $500 billion in the hole on preventive maintenance across the country. So how are we going to do that with $23 billion that's coming from the federal government if we're already 500 in the hole? So
that's a long headline. That's a long headline. I know, Ken. That's a long headline. So Erica, what's your headline?
I'll go back to the toxic bloom. Yeah.
Erica, what's your headline?
I think just to even loop back to the previous session, I think my headline would be that school buildings are not ready to take on climate change. I think there's a lot of work that's been done on climate mitigation, and I commend everyone for that energy efficiency piece. But if we're not thinking about climate adaptation, to Ken's point, why is there a big, allergen bloom? It's because maybe there's species of plants that are now in Massachusetts that weren't there before, and we're now experiencing new conditions that we're not prepared for. So whether it's flooding, extreme heat, extreme storms, there's incredible variability that I don't think our schools are ready for. And so I this is sort of my battle cry to everyone here, is that let adaptation be as part, as central to your conversation as the mitigation, because whack-a-mole will continue.
Whack-a-mole continues. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ken and Erica. It's always a pleasure talking to you both. Stay tuned. We've all been talking about doing a podcast about this topic because the three of us could go on forever. So thank you both for joining us for the summit. Always great collaborating with you, and I will see you all later on.
Likewise. Be well.
All right. So thank you again for sticking with us, for sending in your questions, and for we're going to take a brief pause right now. When we come back at 3 o'clock Eastern, it's going to be speed networking, the Jen and Jess show, which is going to be very exciting. But I'm curious what your headline is. So feel free to type in the chat and tell me what your headline, what you think what the headline for schools will be for the next 5 years. So thanks again, and we'll see you all in a few minutes at 3 o'clock Eastern.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're enjoying speed networking. I know it's not quite the same as mixing over Danishes or a drink, but we're really excited that people are trying creative ways to get to meet each other in these virtual times. I was watching the first sessions and I saw a lot of people shouting out hellos to each other in the chat. So hopefully some of those hellos got to connect in the speed networking. If you missed the networking or just want to continue to reach out, make sure that you drop your name and your affiliation, maybe where you're coming in from, in the chat as we move forward. It's a great way to just make sure that everyone knows you're here and can reach out either individually or afterwards to say hi. While we're waiting, I think we've got a few minutes while people are coming back and getting ready to start the next session. I wanted to take a moment to thank two of our gold sponsors, Daikin and SEAL. Daikin and SEAL are both sponsors of these summit sessions and also NEEP allies. Daikin has been an ally since 2017, and SEAL is our newest ally this year. And as with all of our other sponsors, we could not be putting this event on if it wasn't for them. So thank you to Daikin and to SEAL. Okay, I think we are waiting for people to trickle back from the networking. I'm going to kick off the last session of the day. Just a reminder, we have 3 half days in this summit sessions, and we're covering everything from schools to affordable housing, from community level work to our next session, which focuses on federal priorities and federal efforts. So there's really a vast array of things to see over the course of the 3 days. And today in particular is fun because we started with communities, and it's going to be my pleasure to welcome 2 leaders from the federal government to wrap us up today and bring us home on our day 1 of our summit sessions. Okay. All right. I think we are ready to move forward. So I'll take a few minutes to introduce our last session. And first, I'll just take a moment. I introduced myself earlier today, but my name is Ava Shur, and I'm NEEP's Executive Director. And you've heard people share some NEEP memories throughout today, so I thought I would share my first memory of NEEP. My first memory of NEEP, I've been at NEEP for about 6 months, but I first heard of NEEP at about 10 years ago when I was working at the Department of Energy. And Sue Coakley came to DC and met a number of people at DOE, including me, to introduce me to this organization. And at the time, I was running a program focused on technology deployment. And I was really trying to figure out, I was very focused on how our team's work could reach more buildings and could make more impact on the ground, but really struggling with how our technology deployment and demonstration could connect at that state and local level and reach down to that level. So in walked Sue to tell me about this organization that worked in partnership, across states, with industry, with nonprofits, with building owners, and with policymakers. And I thought, wait a second, there's an organization out there that knows how to do this and how to use partnerships and who can help advance the mission of energy efficiency, please tell me more. And so that was my very first memory of NEEP, and fast forward 10 years and here I am able to advance the work of NEEP, continue to help connect federal government, state government, local governments, and industry advocates to advance the mission of energy efficiency. So I hope that story also begins to explain why I'm so excited about our final session today, The View from DC. So today at the last session, we'll turn our thoughts to the federal government. And of course, a lot is always happening at the federal level. A lot of things are changing and new things are being developed, new practices. So today we're going to hear from two leaders from different agencies about how they are centering communities in their work to achieve the missions of their agencies and to achieve the goals of the Biden administration. Both of our speakers are focused on developing and extending the resources of the federal government to state and local jurisdictions, to communities, and understanding how the goals and needs and achievements of communities can be served by their offices and by their agencies. So today I hope we'll explore how their work is evolving, new resources and new tools that they're developing, and most importantly, opportunities for communities to access the tremendous depth of knowledge and expertise of our federal partners. So hello, I'd like to welcome Ana Garcia, the Director of the Weatherization and Intergovernmental Programs Office at the Department of Energy, and Maggie Molina, Branch Chief of the State and Local Climate and Energy Program at the EPA. Welcome. So just one more reminder in the audience, please ask questions. We're here to have a discussion and hear from you. Submit questions through the Q&A function, and I will make sure to pass them on to our speakers. And once again, drop your information into the chat so you can share that you're here. So welcome, Ana. Welcome, Maggie. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you, Era, for that nice introduction and for the excellent work that the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership has been doing to support energy efficiency collaborations.
Thank you. So I thought we'd start, maybe you could each introduce yourselves and your office and your work and talk a little bit about the role that partnering with communities plays in your mission. Ana, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks, Era. I have been with the Department of Energy since 2010, and prior to that had worked with states in my capacity as the Executive Director of the Ozone Transport Commission, and then at EPA for a number of years in the climate protection programs. It's always so rewarding to work with state and local governments. It's so important to recognize that implementation of all of the work that we do at the federal level is just not possible without strong state-local partnerships. It's been an amazing and rewarding experience. We're gearing up, I think, to have some significant new initiatives with state and local governments in the coming months and years. And I'm looking very much forward to working with the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships and the other regional energy efficiency organizations in that endeavor.
Great, thanks. Maggie.
Sure. Thank you, Era, so much for having me. It's really wonderful to be here with you and Ana from DOE and the whole NEEP network across the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. As you said, I'm the lead of the State and Local Climate and Energy Program at the EPA, and I'm really excited to be here to dig in on the work we're doing to support state, local, and tribal governments and their stakeholders on their goals around climate, energy, and equity. My team is in the Office of Atmospheric Programs of EPA. We are one of several climate partnership programs. This year, the agency is celebrating its 30th anniversary of climate partnerships, and recently at the announcement of the anniversary, we heard from Administrator Regan on the importance of the agency's climate partnerships alongside the agency's regulatory tools to help it advance our mission. We're committed to the hard work that we all must do to meet some very ambitious goals, as I'm sure we'll be getting into, and couldn't agree more with Ana on the importance of state, local, and tribal partnerships in meeting those goals. And because we certainly can't do this alone. So again, just thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and dig in on the work that we're all doing. So thank you, Era. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Peggy. Thanks, Anna. And, you know, I made our big announcement that it was our 25th anniversary, but I was also going to mention the 30th anniversary Climate Protection Program and also the 40th anniversary, right, of weatherization, over 40 years of the weatherization assistance program. So you're both in charge of programs that have, you know, sustained and been around for a long time. But of course, with every new administration comes new goals. Maggie, you mentioned big, large new goals. So my first question to you is, 9 months into the new administration, how are the priorities of the Biden administration being reflected in the work and in the goals of your programs?
Sure, and I can maybe go first on this one. Anna, and so yeah, I think it's clear that the Biden administration is prioritizing climate change, environmental justice, and economic recovery. And we see this in those ambitious goals in clean power sector by 2035, a net zero carbon economy by mid-century, the Justice 40 initiative. And, you know, at EPA, we've consistently heard from Administrator Regan the importance of lifting up overburdened communities and while creating new jobs and building out the 21st century clean energy economy. And he's highlighted the importance of energy efficiency and decarbonization specifically to help meet those, you know, broad goals around climate. In fact, just this afternoon, Administrator Regan was in the Bronx, New York, highlighting an energy efficiency and green technology project in buildings in the community there and highlighting the new job creation from that work. So just as one example. So in terms of work ongoing now, I wanted to highlight some announcements made back in May. So we held, several agencies held a building decarbonization roundtable that highlighted a number of initiatives upcoming and ongoing at EPA and other agencies. But at EPA, just a few Energy Star initiatives that we announced at that point and are ongoing around new residential and commercial sector partnerships to accelerate efficiency and electrification, a focus on underserved residential households through the Energy Star Home Upgrade Program, efforts to accelerate building decarbonization through an advanced Energy Star certification for new residential buildings, support for state and local partners on building performance standards and benchmarking. These are just a few. I didn't want to go through the whole list, a number of things announced at the May roundtable, but just to give a flavor of some of the major initiatives underway now. And then for the state and local program, you know, specifically, we are committed to providing technical assistance to state, local, and tribal partners on a number of areas. I'm excited to dig in on some of the work we're doing around multiple benefits and some of the tools that we manage on emissions, quantification, and public health analysis. But maybe before digging into too deeply into the weeds on some of those resources, I'll leave it at that in terms of some of the high level work. And again, happy to dig in a bit more as we go along here.
Yeah, let's give Anna a chance to jump in on that one.
Thanks, Era, and thanks, Maggie. I couldn't agree more. We are all very laser focused on the President Biden's clean energy goals that are going to put us on this irreversible path to fight climate change with a 100% clean energy economy with net zero emissions no later than 2050. You know, we have, I think people have heard from the Secretary, Secretary Granholm, and from our Acting Assistant Secretary, Kelly Speaks-Bachman, that we have established 5 programmatic priorities that will aid us in our transition to clean energy economy towards these, you know, to address the climate challenge. Decarbonizing electricity, decarbonizing transportation, and also decarbonizing energy intensive industries, as well as reducing the carbon footprint of buildings, and also decarbonizing the agricultural sector. And each of these comes with its own direction and strategy and path forward. It's going to be a little bit different, but these priorities focus on sectors and not necessarily a specific technology. In fact, we're looking at very integrated packages of technologies to get to these goals. And each of these drives towards collaboration across technology offices with our national labs, and of course with federal agencies like EPA, HHS and HUD, states and communities, so that we can meet our objectives. We're also looking, and Maggie made reference to metrics. How are we going to measure success? And how are we going to be sure that we're getting at least 40% of the benefits and the money that we're working with towards those underserved communities, disadvantaged communities that are suffering and will suffer more as the energy economy transitions away from fossil fuels, and as they've not been able to necessarily participate as fully in the transition to clean energy economy to date. So we really want to figure out ways to measure our progress towards that, and we are rethinking how we are running our different programs in order to get to those goals. So those are our key focus areas to getting to a decarbonized economy. We're also using cross-cutting collaborative discussions to prioritize our programs and support energy and environmental justice, diversity in STEM, workforce development in state and local communities. You all might have seen that President Biden was out at the National Renewable Energy Lab last week talking about the different technology developments we have out there and how we really need to scale up our efforts on workforce so we can get these the benefits of these technologies out more broadly across the country.
So I think you both referred to the Justice 40 initiative, the all-of-government approach to making sure that the benefits of federal government resources go to communities that have least received them in the past. I'm wondering, Anna, you mentioned metrics. Maggie, is that something that your program's looking at as well? How do you measure the results of the changes that you're making in order to achieve that initiative?
Yeah, I think metrics are going to be so important have been, of course, and will continue to be important. And as we see new ones, we'll have to make adjustments and make sure we're lined up to follow through and report. A number of different areas on metrics, maybe first on Justice 40, just to provide a bit more there. There has been interim this summer, the administration produced some interim guidance on Justice 40, announcing some process aspects and announcing the Justice 40 pilot program. So maybe we can share a bit more about that as well. But the other thing, the big thing on metrics for some of our stakeholders at the state and local level is increasingly around emissions and connecting the dots between energy savings to emissions. And I think there's a whole conversation there about translating long-standing energy savings metrics into emissions. So maybe I'll use this as a chance to go back to some of those resources I said I'd be happy to dig into, because I think, it really is critical for this conversation around metrics. So for example, one of the tools that we manage is the AVERT tool. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. It's used in a lot of states, but just in case you don't know about it, it's the Avoided Emissions and Generation tool. It's an 8760 model. Could go on and on about the tool, but back to this point of metrics, it helps translate energy savings from efficiency or renewable energy into emissions reductions. So that's a bit more there. And then we have some tools on public health analysis, again, translating those metrics from emissions. If you take AVERT and plug it into our COBRA tool, which is our public health benefits tool, and translate that into estimates of health benefits and monetize health benefits as well. So, I think in a multiple benefits framework, metrics become that much more challenging, but fortunately we've got tools and resources to support that work. So I think I'll leave it at that. There are a number of different areas, ways we could take the metrics conversation, but I'll leave it there. I'm sure Anna's got some thoughts as well.
Sure, and it's going to be great to think about how we collaborate, Maggie, on the use of your tools with the different kinds of resources that we have as well. One of the key issues here is going to be, consistency in how we measure across our different federal programs towards these goals, and that we're, comparing apples to apples as we, get these initiatives going. We're a little bit better at tracking where our dollars go, and being able to help our state and local partners focus those dollars a little bit more on these disadvantaged communities and think about how to target differently. But then in terms of translating it to emissions and other multiple benefits, that's been a little bit more of a challenge for us. And I think it would be great for us to put our heads together and bring HHS and HUD into the mix as well as they continue to work down on their different initiatives that are going to help transition the clean energy economy and apply those tools strategically to really give good numbers out there about what great work is going on and what benefits we are achieving.
Yeah, this is great to hear. I mean, the theme of this summit really builds on all of the benefits, right? Energy efficiency has always been there, has always been thought of as a benefit cost analysis. But as we look to a future where emissions and where public health and where affordability as we decarbonize are paramount, we all have to think about how to be able to not only translate, but speak to the power of all those metrics. And you've mentioned collaborative partnerships within DOE and across EPA, and of course with your state and local partners. What about leveraging funding? So I think, again, as you think to how to leverage funding, different types of impacts attract different types of funding partners. Is there any thought about how those benefits can help with that, help make the federal funds sustainable and go farther?
So, we do our best to try and get as much leveraging going in our programs as possible. The Weatherization Assistance Program has a history of that because it's able to use, for example, part of the LIHEAP money coming out of HHS. States can decide to use a certain percentage of them for weatherization. We are working with our HUD counterparts to try and see how we can leverage those dollars more strategically, particularly in how we focus the weatherization program on these different populations of homes. If you think back to the Recovery Act funding, we had a goal of 1 million homes to be weatherized with those funds. And DOE's WAP program got to about 800,000 homes. And then we leveraged Home Performance with Energy Star and the HUD Healthy Homes Initiative, and other work going on at the state and local level to get to that 1 million mark. Our challenge now in the weatherization program is going to get to 2 million homes and beyond, and we won't do that without significant leveraging. And when you talk about buildings, new and existing, we need to look at how for existing buildings, we scale up our work with energy savings performance contracting in the MUSH market, in the municipal, university, schools, and hospitals. We don't know what's coming in the infrastructure bill. We don't know what might be coming out of reconciliation. But no matter what kind of dollars we have to work with, leveraging them to maximize the number of these different buildings, facilities, transportation networks, et cetera, that we can address, working with our state and local partners, and really getting the most benefit out of them is going to be key. It doesn't matter how many dollars we have, we can always leverage them into more.
Yeah, and to build on that, leverage across different programmatic priorities, within each agency. So, for example, at EPA, there is funding. Back in the summer, there was announcements around American Rescue Plan funding. So specifically, there was an announcement of $50 million in funding specific for advancing environmental justice. Much of that's been allocated, but some of it is still to come. For example, school bus rebates under EPA's Diesel Emission Reduction Act program, or DERA program. More information is coming on that soon. But that program will provide rebates for electric school bus replacements, specifically to underserved communities. So just as an example, leveraging across program and priority areas, a lot of the solution set goes back to like the multiple benefits. The solution set of clean energy technologies, energy efficiency, helps support so many different priorities. So the more we can leverage funds across those different priorities and within networks at the state and local level, obviously the higher impact will be.
And I just want to add one point to what Maggie is saying. As we look to leverage the funding that we have, we'll be putting that kind of language in our guidance documents, for example, for applying for the funds. It's incumbent upon us to help the state and local agencies understand what funding they can leverage, especially as we see whatever comes out of the bipartisan bill or reconciliation. There could be a lot going on, and it's a lot to take in and understand what you can use and how you can make it more. So we will have to do, I think, a good bit of education to ensure that everybody knows, that everybody we're asking to work with us knows how to scale up the impact of those dollars.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we heard a couple of speakers earlier today talk specifically about American Rescue Plan funds and anticipating how they might be used. Are you already working with your state and local partners on some of those questions? And are there any trends you're seeing or new exciting ways that people are considering using those? And Anna, you brought up the era. So I think maybe also what's different from that time around.
Yeah, what's different from that time around is kind of the from what I've seen so far, the scale and diversity and complexity of what we're going to see coming out from the federal sector potentially. And the scope here to try and get as many, particularly community level, organizations working with us. It's going to be a whole new, we had a whole new set of players in Recovery Act, and we kind of got it down. We understand what we did well and maybe what we could improve for that set of entities. But I think it's going to be so much more, and it's going to be, there's going to be so many more technologies to be able to look to using and combining and understanding interactive effects, and trying to really put forward the greatest, the best package of strategies to get to the most carbon reduction. And that is going to take a lot of work on our part to help and to provide the technical assistance to maybe some of the folks out there that aren't used to working with us. That was a problem in Recovery Act. It's going to be a problem with any stimulus here. And we're going to need to think about what we learned, not only what we learned about working with new entities and how to help familiarize them, but to how to help them sort of streamline the pathway to those resources, and then also how to make the most of them, as I said before, with leveraging. So we've got a whole new audience. I think we're going to have whole new audiences to educate, and I think we're going to have to be a little more focused and targeted in our education and our assistance.
Yeah, building on that point of outreach and education, I wanted to flag some upcoming webinars that the Office of Environmental Justice, not my team, but a separate team that we coordinate closely with. They have a webinar series called Growing Grassroots, Building Capacity for Environmental Justice Work, where attendees will learn practical tips on successful grant writing and how to access community-based funding. So that's upcoming this Thursday at 6 p.m., but it's part of a series. And I think just one example of that importance that Anna is highlighting of outreach and education and building capacity at the community level, and that we're all in this together. and looking forward to those continued partnerships.
So that's a great plug for a webinar. I think for a lot of groups, communities, and other groups who have not accessed the federal government resources in the past, it's a very daunting perspective to do that. And so could you each talk a little bit about what's the front door to a community partner, or perhaps a nonprofit partner who works in communities who's interested in this work? What's the best front door for them into the work that you do? And is that changing as you look forward? And I just wanted to remind the audience to send in questions. We have a couple, and I'd love to ask some more. So please send them in the Q&A.
Well, I wouldn't mind starting this one. It's interesting because we're really focused, while we don't know exactly what's coming in future funding bills, we have already working with our FY 2021 budget and resources we had in FY 2020. We are looking at some new programs that came about. So we will leverage our existing networks and stakeholders. Acting Assistant Secretary Kelly Speaks-Bachman has been reaching out to numerous organizations to tee up what is going to be coming as a result of current funding that we have today that we're putting out on the street. One example of that is in our Weatherization Assistance Program, the Energy Act of 2020 mandated the creation of a new program, the Weatherization Enhancement and Innovation Program, where a portion of the weatherization funds are being set aside to do competitive work and to expand the scopes of technologies, practices, workforce development, et cetera, that can be tried out through the Weatherization Assistance Program, and to open that door to nonprofit entities as well as the usual community action agencies that we work with. So we've been putting information out through the Federal Register. We've been talking to groups outside to let them know this is coming. We also have our Sustainable Energy Resources for Consumers program. It's an elective program for DOE when our appropriations are above $275 million for WAP. That was the case in 2020 and in 2021 as well. We weren't able to get those funds out because COVID really impacted the delivery of the Weatherization Assistance Program. So now we have a tidy little sum of money for that program as well. And that's another way of getting new technologies out in the renewables and energy efficiency area through our traditional network of weatherization assistance providers. But I think the word is out on the street that we're expanding the scope of what weatherization is going to look like. And we're looking for new providers to lend themselves to that. We're also looking at how we re-engage with stakeholders maybe we haven't been talking to so much in the last few years, and doing a concerted effort supported at the leadership level in EERE of digging out the other kinds of stakeholders that we need to reach out to now while we're still developing these different new initiatives that are coming out with our existing funding. And I know that the Building Technologies Office has been doing a lot of work with the regional energy efficiency partnerships on codes and workforce, and that will be ramping up as well. So I think there are going to be a lot of ways for us to sort of restart some of the great partnerships we had that maybe have need a little bit of re-energizing, no pun intended, as we move towards this new direction for decarbonization.
And I guess for me, my program is in a different situation that we don't directly manage any grant offerings right now. I've mentioned a couple of programs outside of other groups in the agency, but what we do manage is a robust newsletter, and we do our best to every month compile funding opportunities. Now, Amber, you asked about what's the door. I feel like each of us takes our network and leverages the best we can other networks to ensure the information is getting out to as many doors as we can get to. So we in our monthly newsletter compile funding opportunities, not just from EPA, but from DOE, from FEMA, from a number of agencies, to our state and local partners when it comes to clean energy solutions. So that's one small part that my team is doing, but we hope it's useful in getting the word out on these opportunities.
And on that note, I'd just like to add, we also have our state and local resources solution center within ERE and within my office, the weatherization, the WIP. I can't even remember, Weatherization and Regional Programs Office, sorry about that. I also wanted to mention that in terms of collaborating with new entities, and particularly on the community front, on September 15th, DOE Secretary Jennifer Granholm hosted a fireside chat virtually with community leaders and announced our DOE Communities LEAP pilot initiative. And this is really, so LEAP stands for Local Energy Action Program. It's specifically targeted for environmental justice communities and communities with historic economic ties to the fossil fuel industry. Participating communities must be those with at least 30% of the population classified as low income and experiencing high household energy bills. The communities that are interested and apply will be competitively selected. And we're trying to make that application process as simple as possible. This is really focused on technical assistance and not direct grants through a network of experts for 12 to 18 months to help these communities. The assistance itself is valued at about $16 million. It'll support somewhere between 20 and 40 communities as they work to develop their plans for a clean energy transition. So we're looking forward to getting to work with new communities through this Communities LEAP program and to help them sort of prime the pump for what they need to do, what works best for their communities as they look to transitioning to a clean energy economy.
Yeah, I think people always think about money when they think about the federal government, but Maggie, you started by talking about all of the tools and the resources that are there. And, Anna, your mention of technical assistance, I think, is very critical. A role NEEP has played and the other RIOs for many years is being an organization that is used to working with the federal government and then partnering to bring resources on to organizations that haven't. But it sounds like there are direct opportunities now. And Maggie, I'm wondering if you have new opportunities around TA and education and kind of how to work with EPA.
Yes, I'd be happy to chat about that. So I see our technical assistance kind of along a spectrum. We start with supporting state and local governments on GHG inventories, whether they have an inventory already, looking to refine it or develop a new one, to a lot of impacts analysis. So I mentioned some of the tools on emissions reductions and health benefits analysis and others, to technical assistance directly, supporting on doing trainings on those tools or supporting on program guidance, program design. We manage a number of guidebooks on best practices. We're trying to connect the dots across the country on what's working in certain regions and facilitating peer-to-peer learning. Another area we provide technical assistance on is heat mitigation, urban heat island mitigation. My team has guidebooks and resources on the urban heat island effect. And of course, extreme heat is getting much more attention. We're just coming off one of the hottest summers in almost a century. And the solutions we in the energy efficiency community have multiple, back to the multiple benefits, things like cool roofs and green roofs and shading urban greenery can help mitigate urban heat island. Of course, extreme heat is a much bigger problem and there's going to need a lot of solutions at this one. But when it comes to like localized urban heat islands, which have disproportionate impacts where communities of color and low-income communities often bear the brunt of those local urban heat islands. So we are really focused on heat mitigation strategies and understanding those co-benefits and helping local governments who are working on tackling that challenge. So technical assistance, yes, and accessing technical assistance from across the agency. We're focused on efficiency and clean energy, but we've got our colleagues in the Office of Environmental Justice and the Office of Community Revitalization and the regional offices, just so much expertise. And we are just committed to putting that expertise into the hands of you all on the ground working on this. And when we say technical assistance, it means so many different things. I'll also look forward to feedback on what's most useful. Really focused, committed to stakeholder-driven resources across our portfolio. Coordinating with the team at DOE, to the State and Local Solutions Center, so committed to ensuring that our resources build on one another and complement one another.
The heat island issue came up in our first session today. It was a hot topic for both representatives from the cities of Baltimore and Providence. So I know that is an area of interest. And I'm wondering, is there an example from either agency or a collaborative example of a situation where you have worked with a community or with another partner, and used technical assistance to move them along these goals? Maybe there's funding involved, maybe not, but could you give us I think it helps us to anchor some of this, to hear a really good example.
Yeah, I could start with that. We've got a couple of, under our Better Buildings Challenge program, we have these initiatives called accelerators, and we are focusing on mission critical facilities, for example. One of the successful initiatives we've had here is our Sustainable Wastewater Infrastructure of the Future initiative. And we actually began this in a partnership with EPA's Office of Water, as they had been doing some great work in the wastewater area. And we wanted to build on and complement that work. And so we have run now for 3 years with over 70 partners, this initiative where we are not providing any direct funding, but we are providing technical assistance tools and expertise to these communities, to these municipal wastewater facilities and states that work with them, to develop plans, understand what kinds of technologies can be applied, to use some decision tree tools to figure out what portfolio of technologies to utilize, connect to funding, and then be able to realize some of those reductions as a result of being able to find the financing to put in the technologies and get to the reductions. They have, we set out a short-term goal of at least 5% reduction, and then an overall long-term goal, 10 years down the road, of 20%. And we have seen these communities, most of them, in fact, overachieving on that first goal, exceeding that 5% reduction and really getting to 8%, and having really good actionable plans that they can then find other and leverage other resources for, besides direct DOE funding, to make additional improvements, both on the efficiency side, technology, and resource recovery.
I think those accelerator programs are such a great example of ways to achieve scale. I think for technical assistance, one-on-one technical assistance to a local community is often an option, but to really achieve scale, things like accelerators, trainings across networks of, say, local governments. We've done trainings on our inventory tools for large networks of local governments in a given region, leveraging networks such as NEEPs or other regional groups. So yeah, I think tapping into that peer-to-peer learning is a great example. But we have done direct technical assistance with communities as well. Kansas City, Ava, you asked for some specific examples. Kansas City on urban heat island work, because they were looking at the co-benefits of criteria pollutant reductions from heat mitigation. Washington, D.C. recently looking at some analysis of the co-benefits of heat mitigation. So, one-on-one support is certainly an option, but accelerators and leveraging networks is a great opportunity to scale up where we can. And we know that often it's not, local communities may not want to hear from the federal government. They want to hear from their peers who are sitting in the same position they are in managing or balancing a number of competing priorities from where they sit. So that's another reason accelerators such as those that Anna mentioned are so powerful.
I agree. I think the depth of, as I said at the beginning, the depth of resources that you all have in your programs is there's so much there that can be tapped by communities. And I'm going to feed in some questions for the audience, and here's a very specific one. And Anna, I'm going to put this one to you. Somebody asked, as a local community-based organization, so not necessarily a community, right, or a traditional WAP provider, how can we work more with WAP?
Actually, we require, and as we are looking at putting out these different guidances for these programs, whether they be direct funding like weatherization or whether they be technical assistance, we want to see partnerships. A local community cannot do it on its own. They've got a million other things they're trying to accomplish. So, and we need to help them find and identify the kinds of organizations that can help them, much like the regional energy efficiency organizations have worked with states and communities and gotten together and come up with, a proposal and gotten some funding or gotten some technical assistance. And we at DOE can't be as specifically connected to these communities. And we don't know the problems of the communities as well as the stakeholders. These community organizations will know them. So it's really important. We want to see that, network of partners come in with whether it's a government agency or a community leader coming in for the resources or the funding. We want to see those partnerships as part of the established plan that's put to us for getting those resources.
And Maggie, same question for you, but maybe, a local organization or advocacy group that's pushing their community, right? That wants to push their community to go farther. Can they work? Do you have a path in for them to work with you on tools and resources and support?
Oh, yes. Get in touch. We're a small and nimble team in the state and local program here. I mentioned our newsletter. Check out our website where you can quickly get onto the list for that newsletter, epa.gov/state local energy. And yeah, feel free to reach out, and we'd love to work with you.
So I've gotten a couple of questions. I think reflecting on some of the challenges with stimulus funding in the past, a couple of questions about shorter timelines and lack of flexibility. As you're looking at the current stimulant funds and maybe what's coming in the next budget and in an infrastructure bill, what are you each thinking, or how are you engaged with providing flexibility of funding and some changes that would make ideas in specific? Somebody asked about procurement timelines and having trouble getting electric buses and trying to do things like revolving loan programs. Are you thinking about in your agencies how to be more flexible around funding opportunities and timing?
We are certainly looking at providing as much flexibility as we can design in. I think we are, I wasn't at DOE at the very beginning of the Recovery Act, but I really think that was kind of sprung on the federal government at that time. And there was a real push for quote unquote shovel-ready projects. This time around, we're looking at the notion of developing plans, developing strategies for going forward, then finding a way to help that eligible organization connect to funding. And we're looking at trying to make these programs more sort of staged in terms of the types of work that is done and the kinds of funding that can be achieved at each of those stages. So we are really, and we know that some of the procurement requirements and some of the flow down requirements that we'll still be facing, like Davis-Bacon and Made in America or Buy America, are still going to be very important for us to focus on, but we're also looking at how we can streamline some of the different aspects of those programs, whether it's having DOE take on some of that responsibility or provide additional tools or resources that we might be able to do centrally in order to lighten the burden on the receiving entity itself. And also just, to streamline some of the reporting requirements that we had, because we know it's very difficult sometimes. While we need the metrics, there are ways that we can simplify some of the reporting that we need as we put these different dollars out there. And I think they, from what I have seen, we're looking at these dollars operating really in a longer time frame.
I'll let Anna have the last word on that one, given her expertise on the topic, and we shall see, but certainly it's an important balance between flexibility and many, many other considerations. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that sounds like the technical assistance. If funding is stepwise, right, and there are different components, the technical assistance will become all the more important as long as there's time and capacity to do that.
That's right.
And once again, we circle back to metrics, as is always the way. We talk a lot about homes and buildings. We have, in this session and the other sessions. What about harder to decarbonize sectors? Anna, you mentioned wastewater treatment, but what about industry and some of our built environment sectors that are really going to be tough to decarbonize? What types of work are you doing in that space?
We are currently, different offices within EERE are working on decarbonization strategies or roadmaps that they can, design with a lot of upfront analysis to point us in particular directions to help us understand what subsectors might be the most effective to address, where we should really target our efforts and funding. We have not completed all of those strategies and roadmaps yet. We did release, the department released grid-enabled buildings roadmap that we worked on with the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, I think back in April. I think it was back in April. And so that was sort of a first strategy out the door, but we are working diligently to try and get these strategies in place so we can better focus. And we are looking at how we focus not only our 22 budget. If you look at the president's budget, you can see how we're trying to change the trajectory of some of our resources, focusing more on deployment and looking at where to strategically deploy while we wait for some of these analyses to become a little more final in their development as we get more of the information and try and select the actual pathways we're looking at moving towards. And then there will be more information forthcoming from DOE on those particular pathways. And I think you can see some of the pathways, interestingly enough, in the Communities LEAP proposal, because we are trying to look at how we would address industry transition in these communities. So just as an example, if you're looking at a fossil fuel community that might be transitioning out of that focus, there are still other really important aspects of decarbonizing the industrial sector that could be relevant there, like critical materials and critical minerals, and how to develop an industrial pathway around those, developing them out of different resources, looking at the recycling of batteries and other materials where you can take some of those critical materials back and reuse them. So we are looking at ways to help those communities develop different industrial pathways than perhaps the ones they have today.
We'll be working closely with DOE across the climate partnerships groups. My team doesn't specifically right now work on the industrial sector, but certainly my colleagues in the Energy Star team are working closely on the manufacturing, energy efficiency in manufacturing, and plant certifications and strategic energy management. Another area we're closely working with our DOE colleagues and building off of one another's work.
Great, thank you. We have about 2 minutes left. You know, I'm not surprised. We've talked through a lot of resources, a lot of tools, a lot of new goals and metrics, and you both have your work cut out for you. I guess I'd ask as a closing question, you know, we have people attending who are energy efficiency practitioners, whether they're at the state or community level or in industry. What is the one thing from your office and from your work looking forward that you'd like them to leave with today? What should they be?
We can only choose one, Era.
All right, 1 to 3. Go for it, Maggie.
Oh, geez. I've mentioned multiple times multiple benefits, and I'm going to say it again because it really is my team's bread and butter to support you if you're doing analysis on efficiency or renewables and trying to understand or communicate the multiple benefits. Please know we've got some great free resources, free tools for you to use. And we want to do our best to design or update our tools and design our resources to meet your needs. So please, I guess my second one is please be in touch. Please reach out, and we want to engage. We want to know what's working for you, and do our part to share resources and financial opportunities where they are, and really looking forward. I go back to the importance of state and local partners in meeting these very ambitious goals. We cannot do it alone, and so look forward to working with you all. And thank you, Ara, for the opportunity to be here. Really appreciate it.
And Anna, what's your closing message?
I'll just second a lot of what Maggie said. We can't do our transition to a clean energy economy and get all of the good social and environmental benefits out of it if we do not work well and together with the states, local government, industry partners, all of the folks that are gathered today for your great summit. As you've heard about what we have talked about, myself, Maggie, Ara, yes, please get in touch with us. Sign up for our newsletter as well as EPA's. Keep an eye out for these different funding opportunities and technical assistance resources that are being put out there. Communities Leap, find yourself a partner and come in and see what you can do for a disadvantaged community in your area that might fit within the framework of that new program. And let us hear from you. We need your input and we need your help getting the word out. Outreach, education, and a better understanding of what you need at the community level would be so very helpful to us.
Great. Well, we are at time. Thank you both. You have a tremendous job in front of you. It's wonderful to see both your agencies focused on climate and on decarbonization and on justice, equity, and equity. Those are certainly in our region things that everybody is very concerned about. So we'll make sure we get some of those resources out in the chat later. And just once again, thank you to Anna Garcia and Maggie Molina for your time and for all of the resources that you shared today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Thanks again. Take care.
Okay, that is our wrap for our first day. We went everywhere. We heard from communities, we heard from federal leaders, we heard about schools, and a lot of themes are emerging, including a few things that we will be touching on over the next 2 days, such as I heard a little bit about community microgrids, a lot about how do you decarbonize and drive energy efficiency in affordable and rental housing. And of course, more reflection on some of the new resources at the federal government level and if and how they're trickling down to the states and to communities. So I just wanted to briefly mention that tomorrow we have 3 sessions. We're focusing the first on hard to reach housing, and we'll hear from 3 practitioners who are focused on decarbonization in multifamily and income eligible housing, and they will discuss their program and project work and why the term hard to reach really deserves to be reconsidered. We will also be hearing from 2 state energy leaders in states sprinting ahead. Both Maine and Connecticut are justly praised for their progress on energy and climate goals. And tomorrow we'll hear how they are connecting their goals to community rebuilding. And finally, the elephant on the block, existing buildings performance, which focuses on the city of Philadelphia and how a coordinated policy, program, and private sector effort is working to address existing building energy consumption. I hope you'll also stay for our first demystifying tech buzzwords lunch session on green hydrogen. You've probably seen articles, heard the term tossed around, so join us for a half-hour session about green hydrogen tomorrow. So we'll be starting at 9 a.m. for day 2 of NEEP's Summit Sessions 2021, and we look forward to having you join for another day of discussion. Thank you all for joining us. Bye.